to the Budget Review Commission meeting of March 19, and I will ask for someone to do a roll call.
Chair David Smith.
Present.
Vice Chair Daniel Schweiker.
Present.
Commissioner Carla.
Here.
Commissioner Brad Newman.
Here.
Commissioner Jim Ransko.
Here.
Commissioner Sharon Seitz.
Here.
And Commissioner Mark Stevens.
Here.
We will begin the agenda in a moment, but in terms of public comment, I would remind everyone that citizens may address the Budget Review Commission regarding any non-agendized items during this public comment period. And the rules are that Arizona state law prohibits the commission from discussing or taking action on an item that is not on the proposed agenda. And citizens can complete a card over here, a blue card, if they want to talk during this period of time. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Normally we don't have anyone, but tonight we do have someone who wishes to address us, and that's Ms. Patty Badnock. So come to the microphone and tell us what's on your mind, Patty.
Good afternoon, Chairman Smith. You asked me repeatedly to come with a lot of questions, so I took you as your word, and I did some studying of the 27-page report that was given last time, and I did about 8 pages, and out of that, I came up with 12 questions, which I have submitted to you. So this is what I want to say. Who are we? Where do we wish to go? What do we wish to become? How can we achieve our goals? When can this be achieved? Under what circumstances? Now is the time. The rationale of leadership to insist that these approved high-rise facilities have to be built, knowing the downside devastations that will occur, is preposterous. They will be the takeovers and destroy our quality of life. Question: how can this budget committee review, ascertain the goals to bring the population to a level that preserves our quality of life? Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. Next on the agenda is called the Chair's Report. I guess that's where I talk. I do have a couple of questions or a couple of comments to make. First is to the staff, welcoming back Sherry Scott as our legal counsel. Appreciate you being back with us. Second, which is a question to staff, reading through the minutes of some of the prior meetings, I realize we have a lot of questions that come up where the answer is, I'll get back to you, or I'll provide something on that. And I don't know whether there is some system by which we keep track of those items, and maybe you could talk to that, Sonia.
Yes, Chair Smith, Commissioners. We are compiling responses to all those questions, and they will be provided as an attachment to the chair report in the next meeting as we have those ready. So we're hoping to have that ready for the March 27th meeting. It does take us some time to compile those responses as we're also busy working on getting the budget ready.
Thank you for that. I mostly just wanted to be sure somebody besides me had that responsibility, so you'll take it, and also to be sure that we have the answers available for the public as well, and they will be, of course, if they're agendized. That's good. The second comment has to do with the question of questions that may arise in any one of our 7 minds here as a question that we'd like to take to council, or a proposal we'd like to take to council, just as an individual, not as a group. How do we accumulate those to one day look at the aggregate number of suggestions and vote among ourselves? Yes, collectively we'll all agree to take this comment to council, and no, we don't want to agree to take that one. I can see us at a work study having the deliberation, but I'm not sure how we get a piece of paper that actually has all of those topics on it. And should they all submit those topics to me, or would that be a violation of the open meeting law, or how would you recommend we accumulate those comments?
Commissioner Smith and commissioners, let us think about that and put a process together for you to accomplish that.
Okay.
We'll get that back to you.
Undoubtedly, everybody has some questions in their minds now and may have more in the future. With that said, let's go to the first item, which is the approval of the minutes. And we'll do them individually. And Commissioner Carla would like to talk before we do that, perhaps.
No. Sorry. No, I have 2 corrections for the February 27th minutes, if we're there.
Okay. Why don't you go ahead and give the corrections as you've noted them.
Okay. On the February 27th minutes, page 2, second line down, it says Chair Stevens, and that should read Commissioner Stevens. And then on page 6, again, second line down, Chair Smith commented on the food tax, and at the end it says, the city is urged to eliminate it if it is not eliminated by the state legislature. To be accurate, I think that should change to, he thinks the city should be urged to eliminate it. So it doesn't appear that the group has already discussed it, which we haven't as a group. Thank you.
Point well taken. And perhaps this is an example of where one or the other one of us may be opining on something, but eventually we have to decide whether it's a group report or a group initiative or just an individual person sounding off. Does anyone have any other changes to suggest to the February 27 minutes? Seeing none, then I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes as drafted.
I make a motion we approve the minutes as corrected.
Commissioner Schweiker made the motion. Who seconded it?
I second.
Motion made and seconded to accept the February 27 draft minutes as stated. So find your button to press yes, no, or maybe. And Commissioner Carla, I think you need to press a button.
Oh, sorry.
And Mr. Stevens, Commissioner Stevens.
Are we on the 28th?
February 27, you're
I'm going to hit my button by accident. Whoop. I've got something on the 28th.
so you're just pressing a button right now for yes, no, or maybe.
Press whichever one you want to do.
Okay, it has been unanimously approved. And now we'll look at the February 28 draft minutes and take comments, if any, from anyone. And now Commissioner Stevens.
Yes, I have 2 items. One of them is on page 7 at the bottom of the 28th minutes, the very last paragraph. There's a sentence that says the 5.5% projected payroll growth used by actuaries was not realistic because actual payroll was only growing at about 2%. And then here's where the problem is in my mind. It says, and thus underfunding the plan. If you provide the actuary understated projected payrolls, it would result in an overfunding the plan. So I think that's not a correct statement. So I would propose that you strike the words, and thus underfunded the plan. So I don't know if you want to think about that for a second. Now, I didn't go back and listen to the tape for this one part to see if that's what was actually said, but I don't believe that's a correct statement.
I'll have staff respond to that. It may in fact be correct that if they're assessing a charge, assuming that your payroll growth in the future is going to be 5.5%, and it turns out to be not that, They may not have assessed you enough, but I'm out of my element here. I will defer to staff on that statement.
The way the funding works, as I understand it, is you project salary increases, and if you have a higher than real increase, the present value ends up being higher than if the real number happens. That would make the projected benefit obligation higher than it's actually going to be, thereby driving you towards lower funding. It's just, I hate to be an accountant on you guys like this, but I just bothered me seeing something I thought was factually incorrect. And again, I didn't listen to the tape to see if those were the words that were said. Now, I guess if those were the words that were said in the tape, I guess that's what was said and it stays.
Commissioner Stevens, why don't you let us research that and get back to you on that? I think I understand what you're referencing and referring to. Let us do a little bit of additional look into that and respond back.
Okay, let me withdraw that. I guess we can approve them. I've got one other change. Then I don't know if we can approve the minutes and then go back and correct them later or something. Tell me mechanically how you do that.
I think we can just strike there and thus underfunding the plan and just leave it at that. And then
Those
we
5
can
words go out, that solves my concern.
Yeah, we can just strike
Okay.
that and then we can research that issue and respond
okay.
back to the whole commission.
Okay, and my second one was on section 6, page 8. It's where I refer to, it says, when I'm talking about how staff should review the unfilled positions, the minutes said that I said you should review the unfilled for 8 to 12 months. But if you go to the 2-hour and 10-minute mark of the tape, you'll find that what I actually said was unfilled for all 8 months and unfilled for 4 of the 8 months. And that's just an important distinction, because if you're actually going to do that, the thought would be what was open all 8 months through February 25th. You should challenge those about whether or not those are necessary, or there can be some restructuring to combine positions and save costs. And the other one was what was unfilled for 4 of the 8 months, meaning half of the time it was unfilled, someone else is doing the work. And so that whole point was just something about looking at unfilled positions to challenge whether or not the unfilled positions are necessary. And I understand the theory of unfilled positions, but if they've been unfilled for that long and you're getting by and it's not hurting anything too bad, maybe there's a way to restructure certain roles and eliminate some of the positions, but not all, certainly. So anyway, the change would be strike unfilled for 8 to 12 months and insert unfilled for all 8 months and unfilled for 4 of the 8 months. And I did verify that with the tape. So I guess that would be the only change. Then if there are no other changes, I move that the minutes be, oh no, she made the 2 changes. The striking of the unfunding of the plan. Okay, I propose that, I move that the minutes for the 28th be accepted as amended.
Anyone else have comments on the February 28 draft minutes? Seeing none, I will entertain a motion to approve them with the amendments as suggested by Commissioner Stevens. Did you?
I made the motion. I actually made the
Okay.
motion.
I
second the motion.
Then we've got a second from Commissioner Swiker, and we can go ahead and vote. Yes, no, or maybe. And the minutes are approved as submitted with the changes unanimously. Item 2 on our agenda then is to look at fund reserve balances, fund balances, reserves, and contingencies. And Sonia, I will turn the platform over to you.
Thank you. So the terms fund balance, reserves, and contingencies can be confusing. So I hope to explain what they are and why we need them with this presentation. So next slide. There are various reasons that cities maintain fund balance, reserves, and contingencies. Cities provide a very wide range of public services through multiple departments and operations. Some operations are very large and complex, so it is prudent to have a cushion for unexpected needs. We also have rainy day funds to make sure we can continue services and protect our residents if we have an unexpected downturn or sudden loss of revenues. Another important reason to have fund balance and reserves is to maintain our AAA bond rating. Rating agencies consider fund balance and reserves of utmost importance for a financially sound and strong city. And finally, sometimes we have planned set aside of funds for future use, or simply carry forward or carry over funds that we didn't spend in the prior year that we have plans for in the future years. So when we say fund balance, reserves, and contingencies, we are referring to funds set aside for all of these reasons. Next slide. The term fund balance, reserves, and contingencies can sometimes be used interchangeably, but they really have different meanings, and they really refer to different things. So first of all, fund balance consists of reserves, contingencies, restricted fund balance, and what we call assigned and unassigned fund balance. The first three categories, reserves, contingencies, and restricted fund balance, I will go over in more details in the rest of the presentation. But for the assigned fund balance, what those are funds that we set aside for very specific purposes. For example, we enter into agreements where we know we have a large cash outlay in the next few years, so we may earmark that amount today, so we set aside those funds when the payment is due to make sure we don't disrupt operations to make the payment. Another example might be we sell a piece of land and council would like to earmark the land sale proceeds for a specific project instead of using it for operations. So we assign or earmark that fund balance to specify that for its specific use. Assigned fund balances are shown in the budget as a line item in the fund balance of each fund. Unassigned fund balance is really carry forward funds that can be used the following year. Unassigned fund balance is also shown in the budget as a separate line item. And unassigned fund balance, a lot of times, is carry forward funds that we didn't use in the previous year from a timing standpoint, or maybe certain expenditures take several years to complete and spend, or certain expenditures are earmarked for spending in the future. So basically, fund balance, the term fund balance that we use really refers to reserves, contingencies, assigned fund balance, and unassigned fund balance, as well as restricted fund balance. All of those are components of fund balance. Is that more confusing? Hopefully not. Next slide. So let's talk about reserves.
I'm sorry, I do have a question from Commissioner Stevens at this point.
Sure.
Just to help me on that, I went through your slides in advance, and I'm trying to I understand your contingency and reserve line, and you've got specific lines in the budget for that. Those lines add up in total more than you've got for contingency reserve in your presentation. So does that also include fund balance, the part that's in the operating budget? Because I'm not really sure where fund balance shows in your budgeting process.
Fund balance is reserves plus contingencies plus any restricted fund balance plus any assigned fund balance plus any unassigned fund balance. So those 5 components make up fund balance. So fund balance in and of itself is all of those categories.
I kind of understand the concept of fund balance as it comes to a balance sheet in excess of asset over liabilities. But I notice you show a lot of the reserves and contingencies and expenditure in the budget. I'm just trying to understand if I like the idea of seeing what the pieces of a fund balance and reserves and contingencies are, but I don't know where that's at in your budget book. Or does that show somewhere, or is it just how you do it differently here?
Yeah, Commissioner Stevens, each fund has a set of fund balances that's made up of these. So you're absolutely right. Assets minus liabilities is your fund balance. And we break up the fund balance into each of these components, and it's shown in the budget as each of these components. Now, some funds only have reserves and contingencies. Some funds have reserve, contingencies, restricted fund balance. Some funds have all 5 components. So each fund has a fund balance that's made up of either one or all of these components. And all of these components added together is what we call fund balance.
Okay, then I'll make a final comment for everyone to think about as we go through this description. I was wondering in preparation whether it would be of value for us to see a roll forward of the contingencies and fund balance from the start of the year till now, so we could understand maybe 80% of what went in and out of it. So just park the idea as you hear about this whole thing. Is there a need for this commission to see what is being added to or how it's being consumed, to see if there's things that are going through that because they weren't budgeted that would be of relevant to us? And I don't necessarily know the answer to that, but I want you to think about that as she finishes her presentation. Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Now I have a question from Commissioner Carla.
Simply in response to that, for us to also think about as she goes forward is how much movement there actually is, because that, for me, would guide whether or not we actually do what you ask. So.
Okay. Okay, next slide. Okay, so I'm going to dive into reserves. Operating and emergency reserves are in place to protect our residents and citizens from the city having to stop or disrupt services to respond to a significant emergency or unexpected need. So basically, reserves are rainy day funds used for extraordinary events that are not part of the normal operations. Revenue stabilization reserves are used if the fund is supported mainly by a volatile stream of revenues, and there's no other stream of revenues. So you'll see as we produce the budget, our 0.15 park and preserve tax from the Prop 490, all those operations are supported by just that one tax. And so, you know, with the volatility of sales tax, we do set aside a revenue stabilization reserve. Whereas in other funds where there are other revenue sources in addition to sales tax, we probably or may not have a revenue stabilization reserve, but we would have the emergency or operating reserve. Debt reserves, these are reserves to ensure that we can make our debt payments without having to take funds from operations if an event occurs when there is a temporary or permanent loss of revenues. So if we have either a significant economic downturn, whether it's a 2-3 year temporary loss of revenues, or whether something happens at the state and we lose our revenues either temporarily or permanently, we can still make our debt service payments with these reserves without having to take the funds from operations and disrupt services for our citizens. Sometimes debt service reserves are also required when we issue debt. So when we issue debt, our covenants for issuing debt may require us to carry these reserves. We already talked about asset replacement and future capital reserves at length in our previous meetings when the Commission discussed the need for setting aside funds for major repair replacements. So I'm not going to spend much time on that one. And then the city is self-insured for employee health and dental, and also for workers' comp and general and property liability. And as you know, being self-insured requires reserves for unexpected claims that we have to pay. An unexpected claim can be substantial, and a healthy reserve balance is needed in order to be self-insured. So basically, we don't want to have to pull funds if we have a significant claim, whether it's workers' comp or whether it's a liability claim. We don't want to have to pull funds from our operations and disrupt operations. We want to have to pay those claims with our self-insurance reserves. The reserves in our self-insurance funds are also determined actuarially by our actuaries. They calculate our required reserve levels based on our insurance claim experience and what they forecast for us as a city. Any questions on that? Yes.
Commissioner Carla has a question.
Yes, Sonia, I'm not sure exactly where this fits, but the question is, if God forbid we have a catastrophic fire in the preserve and we have to address a major revegetation effort and possibly rebuilding a access area that's burned down. Is that coming from emergency reserves, contingency, the set-aside that you do in the preserve budget, which won't be big enough to cover all of that? Or does it come from the preserve tax that is slowly accruing? I mean, where would that money come from?
Commissioner Carla, commissioners, that's a great question. So if a situation where we have a major event in the preserve from a maintenance standpoint, we would first look to the funds that provide specifically for maintenance in the preserve. So we would look to that point, the allocation from the 0.15 preserve tax that's for preserve maintenance. And I believe that when you see the budget for that fund, there will be some reserve for major repair and maintenance set aside for any catastrophic event. If that fund is not enough, we will look to other funds, primarily the general fund for emergency reserves.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next slide. So here's some examples for use of reserves. Again, reserves are rainy day funds for extraordinary events, so a major economic downturn or major loss of revenues. And sometimes when we have a major loss of revenues, if it's a permanent loss of revenues, it takes some time for us to realign our operations to adjust to the new level of revenues. We can't just, stop operations just halfway through the year. And sometimes we don't know if the revenue loss is permanent or temporary. So we would want to, continue operations until we have more clarity. So that's what reserves are for as well. Natural disaster or catastrophic events where emergency funds are needed to help us get through the spike in expense and minimize disruption of service to our citizens. Something could be like a cybersecurity event where even if we have insurance funds may not be available immediately, and we might have a significant cash outlay. For example, if we have a cybersecurity event and we wouldn't want to have to take that significant cash outlay from any of our operations, we would want to be able to have reserves for that.
You may have, let me ask you a question. You may have covered this when we talked about the financial policies, and I'm having a memory lapse, but these are examples of how we would use the reserves. Do we have guidance in terms of how we rebuild the reserves, or some financial policy that might say, for example, if we have bonanza income as opposed to a downturn in income, that the bonanza income is put into reserves or something's done with it other than just distributed through the organization?
Chair Smith, thank you for that question. Our policy does require that whenever we use those reserves, that the fund or the department or the operation that uses those reserves, we have to work to replenish those reserves to the level required in our policy within 2 years. So that means adjustments will need to be made to the operations in order to replenish those reserves. And our policy currently allows for a 2-year window if those reserves are used.
And so maybe that's answering a question one shade different than I was asking it. That would talk about how you replenish reserves that are used. And I'm talking about, is there a financial policy that says, again, if we have a bonanza year and we find ourselves with $10 million sitting in the middle of the table unspent, is there a financial policy that guides how that will be added to reserves or what will be done with that?
Chair Smith and commissioners, no, we do not have a policy to basically require us to use excess funds for reserves. We have policies that provide for using excess funds for one-time expenditure needs like capital projects or other one-time needs. So if we have a banner year and we get all this extra money, they do not go to reserves. They go to one-time operating or capital needs.
For the following year.
Correct, for the following year. The reserve, and I have a slide that will show, maybe a few slides down, what our policy reserve levels are. We have established policy reserve levels, and those are the reserve levels that we do maintain in each of the funds, and we don't just increase the reserve levels because we have excess cash.
Commissioner Stevens has a question or comment.
Just help me on understanding how you allocate things to fund balance and reserve. I'm guessing, from what I discerned, once you have a variance from budget and you get to the end of the year, a lot of times you do have an excess because it's a very well, budgeted, managed city. Is at that time then, does council or does the city manager propose the allocation of those excesses to decide what remains in a fund balance, which is unrestricted, and what will be allocated to reserve funds? So how do you deal with that?
Yes, Commissioner Stevens. So as far as operating and emergency reserves, debt service reserves, contingencies, let's see. Those reserves are established in our policy that council approves. So as you'll see in a few slides, actually maybe we should go to that slide. So it's if you flip to slide 9. Oops. This might help.
10, slide 10.
So I apologize that it's really small on the screen, but as you can see, these are the funds that have policy reserves, our general fund, transportation fund, and so on and so forth. In our council-adopted policy, we are establishing these levels of reserves. So basically, what we have is council-approved levels of reserve, and when, throughout the year, we establish these levels of reserve. The percentages are percentages of operating expenditures, excluding debt service and excluding transfers out. So we maintain these levels of reserves throughout the year, at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year. And if you go to the next slide, these are all the reserves that we have in our 24-25 budget. And as you can see, the first column, general fund, that's 94.1 million. That is our 25%. And so for the budget that's coming up, it'll still be 25% of the operating budget. And then the rest of them are similar, where we have the debt service reserve or the preserve tax, the different reserves that we hold in our funds. So the ones that we bring forward to council, it will be through the budget process. It's not a separate council approval. So it would be through the budget process. When we put the budget together, we put the budget following the policies that council approved. Council approved those levels of reserve. So we establish those levels of reserves through our budget process. We know what our debt reserve requirements are, and the future capital reserves, that usually is a collaborative effort with the department as we put the budget together. And if there were any other reserves that we would want to set aside funds for or assign earmarked funds for, we work with the city manager's operations departments, and we present that as through the budget process for council approval.
Commissioner Stevens, again.
I'm almost done. One more thing then. So as I understand it, these are basically board or council designated funds. They're kind of cast in stone. They don't change unless council decides to change them. So the only flexible money, so to speak, would be the unrestricted fund balance. So maybe that's the only thing that might be of interest to us when we look at the budget, is what's the unrestricted fund balance in each of the funds, because that would be pure cushion that council could use to meet other things beyond what the reserves and contingencies are.
So if you go back to, pretty much, but let me clarify one point. If you go back to slide 3, so wait for that to pull up. So reserves are set in stone in terms of the percentage that we have council approved through our policy. Contingencies are established based on operating need. So as a budget review commission, you could say you're not carrying enough contingency here, or you're carrying too much contingency here, you need to reduce those, or you're not carrying enough contingency here, you need to increase those. So there is some flexibility for the commission to recommend. Restricted fund balance are externally imposed restrictions, though it's pretty much, set in stone. Assigned fund balances are amounts that we earmark for specific needs, and that is also, could be, if it's an agreement, for example, if it's a developer agreement where we have already agreed to pay a certain amount, then that is pretty much set in stone. But if it's an assigned fund balance earmarked for something that the city would like to do, then the commission can also recommend reducing or increasing those assigned fund balances, if that helps.
Yeah, so so I'm wondering if, when you present all the budget items, all we should really be thinking about what's in contingencies, assigned fund balances, and unassigned, because those would be the dollars that could move around at council's direction.
That is correct, within the fund.
Within that fund?
Yes.
Okay, so just consider whether that's something we want to see when we start looking at the operating budgets for each of those sections.
Okay. Okay, let's go back to slide.
If you can figure out where you left off, why go back there?
I think we left off on slide 7. So I wanted to talk about this because this is, I think, pretty important, is our reserves are needed to maintain our AAA bond rating. The rating agencies we use, Fitch Ratings, Moody's, and S&P, score our reserves separately from other financial metrics or categories that they look at, because they consider reserves as important to rating. And we recently received a rating opinion from Fitch, where they very specifically said that a decline in available general fund reserve levels sustained below 20% of spending could lead to a downgrade or negative rating action. And this is sort of the table that they follow. Scottsdale is considered to have a low mid-range budget flexibility, meaning that, if there was a significant downturn, we don't have high flexibility in eliminating our expenses in the general fund, or not spending in our general fund, because our general fund is primarily public safety and services that we deliver to the citizens, to public services. So with that limitation, we need to maintain greater than or equal to 20% in the general fund to maintain our AAA bond rating. So this is from Fitch, and Moody's and S&P has similar types of scales and metrics where they consider what a AAA bond rating requirements are for fund balance. And that's why we established our general fund policy at 25% for reserves, because at a minimum, we're saying that the operating and emergency reserves need to be at this level, and then the assigned or unassigned fund balance could be maybe a little bit more flexible, but the reserves need to meet this AAA rating requirement. Next slide.
I think before you leave that slide, I just want to make a comment, but because I played this game for several years of paying attention to our AAA rating, but I think it behooves us to be mindful that, even as the words say up there, one rating agency says that a decline in the levels could lead to a downgrade. There are many other factors that they look at in determining a AAA rating for any city. And I think it also has to be put in context of what are we willing to do as a city to maintain a AAA rating. And I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I am saying that we shouldn't maintain or shouldn't strive to maintain a particular rating without having a, if you will, a robust discussion of what that implies. because it's, we're to the point where we're really not issuing not issuing significant new debt like we did before, although I guess I have to admit we approved $120 million last night in MPC debt. But the point is this, I wouldn't want to see us always hide behind we can't do this because the AAA rating and whatever, without, as I said, having an understanding of what are the implications if we had a AA rating like many other cities do, and is the council willing to take that risk? It just needs to be a discussion rather than a statement of fact. Commissioner Newman.
Along those lines, as you were speaking, I was thinking about this, because there's an incremental cost to maintain a AAA bond rating, so there's an incremental tax that has to be levied to maintain a 20% reserve. But then there's also an incremental cost on debt that you would issue in terms of the rate you would get at a AA versus a AAA. And it seems like those two ought to be about equal. I don't know what this is here versus what we actually need there and what we actually save in that. So, because your point, we say, hey, it sounds great to have AAA, but that also comes with a tax that goes with it. And so it seems like an analysis around that would be appropriate. I'm going to be clear. Don't do it. We can talk about it, but it seems like we ought to think about that right there, and not just as Commissioner Smith said, is just to say we have to have a AAA. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. Certainly want to be credible and solvent, but it comes up to what our history is and our payment history also that are factors in that. But there's an incremental cost to it, and I agree with Commissioner Smith.
City manager wants to weigh in on this topic as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That triggered a thought. I agree with the comment, and the term I may also use is an opportunity cost. I don't know in my mind that a taxation is equal, but the opportunity.
Well said.
Thank you.
And then just let me add a few more things. This statement is not a statement from me. It is a direct quote from the opinion letter that we received from Fitch Rating. So it is definitely something that they shared with us. And you're absolutely right. There are other factors they look at, not just reserves. They look at our economy. If our economy is a robust, growing economy, our property tax base, our assessed values. So there's a lot of factors they look at in order to assign a rating. They also look at they also compare us to a portfolio of like cities with AAA ratings. So when we look at all the AAA rated cities in the valley, which is Chandler, Tempe, Gilbert, Peoria, I think every city except Peoria has a higher level of fund balance in the general fund than the city of Scottsdale does. So I just wanted to, share that information. But you're absolutely right. I think maybe a larger discussion needs to be had as to what level of reserves we should maintain. It's just that the communication we have from at least one rating agency is that we should maintain above a 20%.
Commissioner Swicker.
So just as we're talking about these things, just for a frame of reference for us, ballpark, like, what's the point spread between a AAA and a AA bond?
Vice Chair Schweiker, I do not have that information. I do want to point, we can look for that information. If it's available, we could try to find that. I think that information may, vary depending on the market sometimes, so it might not be a fixed point spread. The other important thing to keep in mind also is, it's not just the point spread in terms of the importance of a rating agency. Rating is not just to save the city interest. Rating agencies are the only independent agency that gives a city a rating on our financial performance and financial credibility. We do not get that sort of opinion from an audit. An audit is just looking at whether the financial statements are put together, you know, in terms of the numbers, but that they're fairly accurate. Whereas a rating agency looks at the financial policies, the financial management of the city, and the financial strength of the city, and is the only independent scoring and evaluation of the city. So it's really important to us that we have this independent source of assessment for the city. And if we want to not be a AAA city, I think we need to make sure we fully understand what that means.
Probably enough said on this, but I think you can gather a sense of that some of us at least think we need, as I said, a more robust discussion of what is the cost of the AAA. We may still decide to recommend that we make every effort to maintain that, but it's hard to make that recommendation without some understanding of what are the pros and cons. Commissioner Stevens?
This will be quick. Commissioner Newman's got me really thinking about when you would do something like that, and my gut reaction is maybe that's something you just hold in your hip pocket, because when something catastrophic happens, that's when you maybe dig into your reserves, and then the way you get out of it is by taking a higher rate on debt issued for the future. So I kind of like that cushion being there, but it's an interesting observation. Thank you.
Commissioner Ransko. I think we're ready for you to proceed.
Okay, next slide. So we did not only establish our level of reserves based on bond rating requirements. We actually follow the GFOA risk-based analysis in determining our reserve requirements. And this has nothing really to do with bond ratings, but rather the Government Finance Officers Association's best practice recommendation. So the risk-based scoring looks at all these categories of risk, and basically, based on that assessment, if the total score is in that little box, you'll see within certain ranges, then the GFOA recommends reserve levels within those percentages. The preliminary score that we have is 23, and so we would fall within the 17 to 25% category in terms of what's recommended by GFOA. And since we're on the higher end of the total score range, that 25% is also where we have our reserve levels. Next slide. We've already gone through this slide, so I'm going to skip the next slide as well and skip this slide. So now I will talk about contingencies. Next slide.
Let me, if I can, have you back up 2 slides to the budget reserves that has all the dollar, that one right there that's on the screen. And I will just observe that the line actually consumes 3 lines, but the line called asset replacement / future capital reserves, this is the one that we've talked about at some length in prior discussions about having some kind of, I don't know whether it's a reserve or at least a recognition of future obligations for asset maintenance and repair, and I can't help but notice that we have nothing on that line, and maybe that's the current status. Maybe you're leaving it blank so we can have a discussion of that, but to my mind, that's where some provision would be made for the future maintenance of the collection of assets that we have. The other question I have about this slide is that I'm aware that somewhere we have $100 and some odd million of reserves or contingencies. I don't know what label you have on it, but it's the money that you set aside to hopefully one day pay down the pension liability. Does that figure into this slide, or?
Those are not reserves, Chair Smith. Those are just assigned funds. Those are assigned fund balances. They're not reserves.
Very good. Thank you. I see no other questions, so go back to whatever the slide after this one is on contingencies, I guess. Now I do have a question. Commissioner Newman.
Can you go back to that slide, just a clarification, because I think asset replacement, future capital reserves, that's one line, it's 63 million. You said there was nothing there, but there's 63 million there. Correct?
If I may assist, I believe what the chair was referencing was the general fund. If you look
I
at the
think that 63 million comes from the columns to the left of it is the aggregate number of.
Right. But there is some there, because I think the statement was that there was nothing there, and we needed to allocate something, but there is money there.
I just meant there's nothing under the general fund.
Ah, okay, sorry. Thanks for the clarification.
Just ignore us up here. We're carrying our private conversation. Go ahead.
All right, let's go to slide 12. So as we talked about, reserves are for extraordinary events that are not part of ongoing operations or are not part of normal operations. Contingencies are set aside, or sometimes folks use the term reserves for contingencies. That's why it's so confusing. But contingencies are amounts set aside for unplanned and unavoidable expenditures that occur in the ordinary course of doing business. Larger than expected storm damage, unexpected purchases that cannot be delayed, such and such. Next slide. Here are some other examples. I think sometimes there are also opportunities that provide benefits to our citizens that was unanticipated and not budgeted for. An example I have is we recently had a storm damage where we had to go in and do some storm damage cleanup and reconstruct certain infrastructure. And we noticed that while we're doing that, we could make some improvements as well. Since it's already all torn up, we might as well make some improvements. It's not part of the storm damage, but it's an opportunity to provide benefits to our citizens. So that could be a use of contingencies as well. The next slide. So for our 24-25 budget, these are the contingency amounts that's in our separate funds. As you can see, the contingencies in each of the funds vary. They are larger in some funds and smaller in some funds. The largest level of contingency we carry is in our grants fund. And again, I apologize for how small this is on the slide, but you can see somewhere in the middle of the table it says grants, and we carry 10 million in contingencies for our grant fund, and that's because there could be significant grants that we don't anticipate that we get awarded during the year, and in order to spend those funds, we would have to move the budget authority from contingency to a line item. If we say, let's say we got a $5 million grant for something, we are not able to spend that money unless we have budget authority, and so we will move the budget authority from the contingency line in order to spend those grant funds. So that's why we carry a lot higher contingency in our grant fund. For our tourism fund, we carry a higher level of contingency because we do have a contract for our destination marketing, and our contract is based on the actual bed tax that we collect. So we collect significantly more bed tax. Based on our contract, we would have to pay the vendor for, based on our contract. So we would have to be able to move that funds and budget authority from contingency in order to meet that contract requirement. If you have no questions on contingencies, I'll move to the next slide. And
Actually, I do have a question from Commissioner Stevens.
I'm sorry, just trying to understand your budget. Help me understand one thing, if you would. The general fund budget for contingency and reserves in the fiscal book is $245 million. You present here $94 million and $20 million, which is $114. Does that mean you used over $100 million of those reserves and contingencies, or is that line not fully described?
so if we go back to slide 3,
So it's more than just contingencies and reserve, and that's
So that-
45?
So there are different categories of fund balance. So the 94 is just the operating and reserve contingency that our policy requires, which is 25%. 5% emergency and 20% operating. So when you look at the budget, you'll see an emergency reserve that's 5% in the general fund, and you see a operating reserve that's 20%. And
Okay,
that's based on policy.
I'm good. You can stop. I'll go offline if I can't understand it later.
Okay, I'm sorry.
There's-
I'll just add one more, because I think the other fund balances are assigned and restricted funds, and mainly assigned funds. So like the PSPRS amount, I think there's a Cavison amount, I think there's some other amounts in the general fund. Those are assigned fund balances.
Okay.
Okay. So we go to the slide 16, and that is my last slide. So slide 16 shows all the funds that have restricted revenues. So all of these funds, the revenues are restricted for specific uses within those funds. So the fund balance that's in those funds, whether they are reserves or contingencies or assigned or unassigned, are restricted fund balances, because we cannot move them, transfer them, or sweep them into the general fund or move them into another fund because another fund is short of money. So I just wanted to point out that all of these funds are restricted funds. The capital project funds, if we have bond proceeds, those are restricted for the capital projects for which we issued bonds. Impact fees, we collect water and wastewater impact fees. Those are restricted for capital projects in our water and wastewater capital plans, grants, transportation tax, and any other restricted revenues. That's really all I have in terms of those. And that's my last slide, and I can answer any other questions you might have.
I'll ask my fellow commissioners if any of them have questions on this subject before we move on to the next topic. Speak now or forever hold your peace. Seeing none, we'll go into topic or agenda item number 3, which is an overview of the proposed 5-year capital improvement plan for next year. And Sonia, you're up again.
I'm actually going to have our budget director, Scottsdale, do the presentation on this.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. For the benefit of those listening, Scott Saline, City Budget Director. I'm very pleased to be here today to discuss agenda item number 3, which is a high-level overview of our proposed FY 25-26 capital budget and our 5-year capital improvement plan, or CIP as it's often referred to. Can we go to the next slide? So combined together, the proposed 25-26 capital budget is just over $1 billion. What you're looking at here is the split of that proposed roughly $1 billion budget in FY 25-26 between individual programs. I apologize that some of the text may be difficult to view against the color. You'll see that water management and transportation encompass about 60%, and service facilities, community facilities, and public safety combined together take about 35%. Preservation and drainage make up the remaining 5% of the 25-26 proposed capital budget. Can we go to the next slide? This slide shows the different funding sources for the 25-26 proposed capital budget. Just a couple things to call out on this slide. I won't go through all of the slices of the pie, but about 18% comes from the general fund. We have about a quarter, a little bit more, 28% coming from rates and fees. There's about 20% coming from debt. As part of that, we use general obligation debt, which is paid by property taxes, and we also use MPC debt, which is secured by excise tax revenues. Could we go to the next slide?
Before you leave this slide, let me ask, first of all, just make a comment for whoever may be in the audience or watching. I mean, this is a $1 billion pie chart we're looking at here, and this is $1 billion of capital budget items. to be approved just for next year. And with that frame of reference, I do have some questions about the funding sources that you've shown on this most recent slide here. You say the transportation sales tax, is that both the 0.2 and the 0.1? The 0.2 being the transportation sales tax, the 0.1 being the temporary tax for alternative life cycle products.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, that is our understanding, yes.
Does it also include the HERF money, or where would the HERF money distribution from the state, where would that be in this pie chart?
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, that would be included in other.
Is that also where the preserve dollar tax receipts would be, in that little wedge called other? The preserve tax being the 0.15.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, Sonia is nodding, so the answer is yes.
I think the, for anybody, for this to be an instructive slide, maybe it needs to say more rather than less, because if I don't know the answer, I'm pretty sure nobody on TV land knows the answer. Can you tell me also on the wedge that's called the general fund, $180 million, 18% of the total billion-dollar program, how is this $180 million determined? What is the tax bucket that creates this contribution from the general fund?
Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Did you say repeat it? Looking at the pie chart piece that's the general fund, $180 million. My question was simply what in the general fund is the algorithm or the mathematics or the percentage, or what is the determination that the general fund will contribute $180 million next year?
Okay, so this is not what, the $180 million does not represent the 25-26 contribution from the general fund, because a significant portion of our projects are carried forward from previous years that aren't completed yet or haven't started yet. So the general fund, based on policy, provides a portion of construction sales tax, interest earnings, and any excess funds that we transfer every year to cover capital projects that don't have a dedicated funding source. So over the last 3 years, we have contributed, I think over the last 3 years, between the land sale proceeds and the excess revenues we collected from sales tax and interest and construction sales tax, we did send over over 100-something million in the last 3 years from the general fund for a variety of projects. And then for this fiscal year 25-26, I don't have that number in front of me, but I'll get that number for you, or you'll see that number when we show you the proposed operating budget. It will be 25% of the construction sales tax, the interest earnings as we have in our policy, and about $33 million of excess funds. Those are the amounts that we're transferring in fiscal year 25-26. This represents the amounts that's carry forward that we will spend in 25-26, because over the last 3 years, as we have transferred these funds to the capital projects, some of these capital projects are either not started yet or are in progress and haven't spent all the money yet. So that's what this 180 represents, the spending of capital expenditures that we anticipate over the last few years, the carry forward, and this year.
And I was aware of the mathematical requirement that in the general fund, 25% of construction sales tax has to go to capital, and that interest has to go to capital. These, of course, are because of financial policies adopted by the council. I just wasn't aware, and maybe still am confused about what the discretionary monies sent. I know we have to send them those 2 buckets. but I don't know what the discretion. And my reason, the root cause of my question, or the root purpose of my question, is that when the general fund sends money to the capital program to complete new projects, old projects, whatever, overruns, underruns, when it moves money over there for that purpose, it is apparently moving money that would otherwise be available to be spent within the general fund or within the transportation fund. And then it begs the question of what are we giving up in the general fund portfolio of services? What are we sacrificing in order to move these discretionary general fund dollars to capital? Does that at all make sense?
It does. Thank you, Chair Smith, for that question. It's a huge balancing act that goes on between the city managers, operations, and with our executive team and our budget team. We look at both operating needs and capital needs that require general fund. There is a huge long list of capital projects that require general fund money, from public safety to municipal facilities to technology improvements to just facility upgrades and improvements, including this building that requires some upgrade and improvements. So we look at that list, and we literally have an above the line and below the line, method of deciding and balancing what is needed in the operations versus what we can afford to spend on capital. What are the critical needs on the capital side that we may need to fund and forego certain operating expenses because these capital needs are just too critical. So that balancing act is, as you described, what we actually go through the budget process with the city manager's office and the executive leadership team, where we decide, is this going to be above the line or below the line? Is that critical and it has to be funded? We will have to take general fund money to fund it because there's no other source of money, and maybe we have to give up, something in the general fund, maybe some program expenditure in the general fund in order to fund the capital project. And likewise, if the operating funds have these requests, that line shifts up. We can't fund as much. So it is definitely a balancing act, it's definitely a prioritization, and it's definitely a challenge, as we typically have more needs than there are resources for. I don't know if City Manager Greg Caton would like to add to that.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Chairman, and members of the commission. I think Sonia said it quite well. There's constant pressure on the operating side with increases in costs on the contractual, other types of regular operation expenditures, including wages. There's been a huge amount of pressure for wage increase, and so and labor costs in general and other costs. So you have this operating side, and quite frankly, balancing that with revenues. And revenues, we've had some very good years, but when you start to put it on a trend of 5 to 10 years, in balancing with some of those inflationary measures such as labor costs, and you start to get a little stressed over those two trend lines. And then, as this commission has had extensive discussions about the expansive capital needs, about the replacement needs, the maintenance needs, that's the other side that you have with the capital projects. And so those two are conflicting. So my budget philosophy, I would say, is to constantly put downward pressure on the operating side, because that allows flexibility or additional funding on the capital side, because those are your two levers that you're constantly looking at. However, it's not as easy just to say, I didn't use the word the cut, but downward pressure, efficiencies, innovation, things of that nature, because you have constant demands for more service, for more on that operating side, but yet you still have constant deteriorating assets, capital, things on the other side of the balance sheet. So that's the prioritization that Sonia referenced. Additionally, as I get into a few slides here in a minute that I have talking about what creates a capital project and then what are we also putting in the operating side? And operating side where we may be projecting out 5 and 10 years on certain types of replacements, some telecommunications, radio systems for first responders, things of that nature, some PPE for first responders, where if you don't plan for those on a regular basis, then they become a significant expense. Oftentimes put in a capital, and they're not really a capital item. And so we've talked briefly about that, where I loosely refer to that as kind of operating capital. And the good news is you're really planning for it and over a 5 to 10 year span versus just some multi-million-dollar we have to replace PPE or radios for first responder if you didn't plan for that. So I'll pause there. It is a constant struggle, and you'll see as we get into the capital, there's always more needs than resources, and we present the balanced budget, and we had to draw the line somewhere. And again, keeping in mind the significant pressures that we have on the operating side and how the two interplay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I won't have you repeat that for everybody, but I think in a synopsis you're saying, and I agree, it's a difficult job of prioritization. I just want to be sure that we and the council and the public are aware that there is this not commingling, but this competing needs, which are both capital and operating. And given a finite source of money in the general fund, if we send something to the capital program, it's going to deplete what we might otherwise send to the operating program, and vice versa. It's not always clear that the two are as integrated as they really are in the prioritization.
Mr. Chair, I concur. I might also point out that it's interesting at the dedicated revenue sources and how every community is different in that regard. Thankfully, here, I'll just use the transportation sales tax. That's quite an opportunity where we say, okay, our needs are met through that dedicated revenue source. That sounds good in theory. The other thing I might point out is how was that number arrived at? How is that percentage? And does it actually equal what you have on the needs side? There's an assumption that it balances. I think that's an assumption that may or may not be the case when you start to take a look at these. Oftentimes, where I come from, some of these percentages are what's palatable to the community. It's not necessarily based upon your needs list. And so that's just something to keep in mind, that even when we have these wonderful opportunities of dedicated revenue sources, it might not exactly meet the needs on the expenditure side.
I've hogged the microphone here for a few minutes. Does anybody have any other questions on this slide before we let them go on to slide number 4? Seeing none.
Okay, could we advance to the next slide, please? So the slide you're looking at right now splits up the proposed 5-year CIP into existing projects on one row and new projects onto another row. You'll see in the first column, we show that we have 341 total projects, only 46 of which are new projects. The next 5 columns show the proposed expenditures for the 5 years of the CIP, split into existing projects and new projects with a total on the end.
Let me interrupt you and have let Commissioner Stevens ask a question here.
I could wait till the end of this slide. I do have a question on the current year. You want me to wait till the end of the slide?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I like the way it was laid out. Let me ask you something. Existing projects at 295 with a planned expenditure of 966 million. If I look at this same chart from the prior budget book, there was a planned expenditure of 530 million in fiscal year 25-26. So I thought existing projects were ones that were there at the start of the year. But for that to go up 400 million, it's got to be a combination of cost increases, but have you also added projects added during the year to this? So I'm wondering if a better presentation might not have been projects existing at 7/1/2025, which would be what was in last year's budget book, so I could see how much you're planning on spending on that. Projects added during the year, because I'm assuming you're added projects in the year, and then new projects being what I guess you're proposing through the budget process. And I'm trying to understand how you add projects, because part of it's what we're doing this year, and part of it's going to be what do we need to be doing in the future. So just kind of go over how that works, maybe, if you understand what I'm saying.
I do. I might have to ask Sonia if she could respond to that to some extent.
Sorry, we were sidebarring here. So what we were sidebarring is I have a few slides in a minute that talk about how we add a project. That might be helpful to the discussion.
Okay, but eventually I'd like someone to tell me what the $400 million difference is, whether that's projects added, cost increase, or what of each, and maybe that's something you just need to get back to me later.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that? What?
Okay, if you look at last year's capital appropriation budget, when it has the dollar amount it has the dollar amount you expected to spend in 24-25, then it had on those same projects that you planned last year for the budget year, what you planned to spend in 25-26. That number was $530 million. Okay, so I just took what you said you were going to spend on those projects at the start of the year and compared it to what you're saying on what I thought were existing projects, and it's now 966. So there's a $400 million difference. So that's either cost growth on contracts you knew you were doing at the beginning of the year, or it's also contracts that you added somehow during the year that weren't foreseen. And I'm wondering if a better presentation for us might not be projects in the start of last year, projects added, and then I thought new projects was going to be new projects since last year's budget book, but it sounds like new projects might be just what you're adding through the budget process. So help us understand what those things are.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So projects, the existing projects that are in your 24-25, there's a lot of moving pieces. Some of them have been completed, so they're not showing up here as existing projects anymore because they're done. Some of them, existing projects, may have been just the design costs in 24-25, and now is the construction costs. So the design cost may have been a fraction of the total project cost, but it's an existing project. It's not a new project. We also carry forward what's unspent from the 24-25. So there's several reasons why you can't just simply do the math. We have over 340 projects, and there's projects rolling off because they are done and complete. There are projects in various stages. Some of them are in construction where phase one of the construction may be only, let's just say, $2 million, but then fiscal year 25-26 is the second phase of construction, and it may be $10 million that's in the budget, but they're an existing project. So there's a lot of different possibilities for why we have last year 500 million. It's not just 500 million minus projects completed plus cost increases. It just depends. Each project is different. It just depends on where that project is and what that next scheduled funding is. All the projects are approved through the capital improvement budgeting process. I don't know if that helps, but if you want us to show you and split out a reconciliation of existing projects that's been completed, existing projects that have a second phase in fiscal year 25-26 that was in last year's second year, we can try to do that for you so you can actually see how the adopted budget from 24-25 rolls to the 900 and something amount for 25-26. There's definitely carry forward amounts that we have budgeted in there.
Okay, well, I also noticed you had several projects when I compared the book you just handed out with last year's book that were just rolled into this year, like cactus pools and some other things. None of it happened last year. You just rolled it all into this year, so that's going to be some of the increases because of the way you time projects. And I guess for you all as commissioners, I'm struggling. What I'm really struggling with is how do we add value to this whole process? And so I don't want them doing work for me just to guess what I'm trying to get at. And when I look at how do we add value, we either add value by looking at projects to see if we can find ways to lower cost, or we've heard that there's been a lot of surprises in the project process. Should we be looking at the project management process and look for best practices in order to minimize surprises that come out of it? So I'm just really struggling with how we add value. Back to your question on this, I guess if it wouldn't be too much work, it would be more helpful to see projects that were at in the 7/125 book, that portion going out, projects added during the year, and then what are I don't know what new projects are. If those are projects you're proposing through this process that council hasn't seen yet, that might be a little more helpful to tell us where to look. Or otherwise propose alternatively, I guess help us understand what we should be looking at to add value here.
I want to venture to say that a lot of projects like our transportation ALCP projects and our water sewer projects, those are primarily the bulk of our capital improvement projects. Bond 2019, really those three programs. A lot of them may have moved from design and engineering to the construction phase, and there may be that increase, but we can do that reconciliation for you. It might just take us a little bit of time because it may it's probably a manual process. We probably don't have a report that we can generate from our system that easily shows you that. So we may have to manually add up the change for each project in order to show you that to satisfy your interest in understanding the difference.
Okay, let me drop that for now, and we'll decide maybe we want to talk about that offline, or you all did a great job for Dan and I starting to get us up to speed a little bit. Maybe we need to do something like that again to help the group.
If I can jump in, I think what Commissioner Stevens is driving at, certainly if we look at the slide right now, it would tell us if we were trying to predict in 26-27 what the spend was going to be, it would suggest it was going to be $407 million. But when we see this piece of paper next year, that 407 will have magically changed to probably something like $800 or $900 million. And for those of us that try to reconcile things, we don't know how to get from that old number to the new number, and to just accept that the new spend is $966 million this year requires some reconciliation to where it was last year. What came in, what went out, and not down to the penny, but certainly an order of magnitude appreciation for it.
A lot of it is carry forward because the city is really not cutting $1 billion in checks next year. So a lot of it is carry forward. But we can certainly reconcile it and show you maybe the components to help you go from 24-25 to 25-26 to see what is carry forward. Actually, hang on a sec.
And the importance for the public generally is to, if anyone were paying attention and trying to think, well, all right, I take what we're doing this year, next year we're going to only spend $400 million. Well, we'll be back here in 12 months, and the answer will be it's not $400 million, it's $800 million for reasons yet to be explained. So some reconciliation. But Commissioner Newman.
Okay, on this, I'm just wondering if you look at this from a longitudinal standpoint of cash flow, because you're talking about the carry forward, and it's really projects, some go faster, some have delays, and so there's the planned amount, so you got your capital plan, which I would say the new project line is your capital plan right now for new projects, but because the existing projects have cash flow delays and things like that mixed in with existing projects. So I don't know if you look at this longitudinally, because we really don't have a $500 million budget. We have a $1 billion budget. It's just there's a $300 or $400 million a year that rolls because we're kind of planning ahead of what the actual cash flow is going to be. It seems like we ought, it's an iterative process. It's not easy, but you got to go through that and do that. But it seems like we ought to have more of a longitudinal picture of cash flow and say, here's how much is new projects that we're going to spend year 1, year 2, 3, 4, and then here's the projects that are ongoing, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then here's the carry forward from things that were kind of unexpected in the current year that's going to end up next year, and that adds up to your total budget. Because all we get is a vertical snapshot here, and in reality, once you start a project, you're committing for 4 years on a water plant or a road or whatever, and so there's a certain profile of cash flow that goes with that, and it seems to me it might be better to look at it that way in terms of planning.
Yes, thank you. So yes, internally, that's exactly what we do. Internally, we budget and plan and make sure we have sufficient funding using a cash flow model for each of our funds and each of our capital improvement programs. This is just a high-level slide. Basically, it wasn't meant to answer all these questions, so I apologize. This is just a high-level snapshot of what is in our 5-year capital improvement plan, and it wasn't a slide meant to try to show you all this information that you're interested in, and we can certainly work with you to provide that. But we do look at our capital improvement plan and what we can fund, what we can afford from a cash flow standpoint. We do project the cash flow, the cash revenues, resources that we will have, the expenditures that we need from a cash flow standpoint. Now, keep in mind that every single project in the existing project line has been approved by council, whether it's through the budget process or whether it's during the year. There are more projects that are approved through the budget process than there are new projects approved during the year. A lot of it is carry forward because as construction projects go, it's hard to know what the timing is. It's hard to know, how to budget exactly. We're going to spend exactly this year and exactly that the other year, another year, or next year. So we tend to be more conservative and assume that we will spend more in this first year. And a lot of it gets carried forward. A lot of our projects also move from design and engineering to construction, so the second year, third year budget may be larger. We've also experienced a lot of inflationary increases where we've had to come back and ask council for an increase in the budget for the project. So all of these are the various multiple factors that layer into these numbers, but you're absolutely right. We should be able to reconcile for you the 2024 to 24, 25 to 25, 26 to show you how those numbers work. It will be a manual process for us. There is no system report that can just spit out to show that. And you're absolutely right. We do look at all of this from a cash flow standpoint. And this was just a snapshot of what the proposed budget is.
If you think about your history here, would you say that there's generally a $300 to $500 million carryover every year?
There's generally more than that, so our carryover this year, Scott just shared with me, is $556 million is our carry forward this year.
Yeah. Okay.
Commissioner Ransco?
I think a little clarity would come, and this is a question, if we change the word plan to WIP. This is more work in progress than it is a budget or a forecast or a plan. This is work in progress. This is not the budget for the next 5 years. This is work in progress that is obviously bleeding out as it gets completed. Because we're obviously going to spend more than $195 million in year 29, 30 on projects. But, so I think this is a WIP forecast and as opposed to a plan.
You all can answer that, but I think for the out years, it is indeed a number that will change in the future with the addition of new projects every subsequent year. And really all we're focusing on is the highlighted area, the 25, 26, and trying to understand with some reconciliation how it got from where it is to where it is, or where it was to where it is. So if you think you can do that, all power to you.
Well, we can
Mr.
try.
Carley, you had a question. Maybe you've withdrawn it?
No, I will save it for future agenda items now. Thank you.
Then Commissioner Stevens, you have another comment you'd like to make.
Yeah, let me expand on that. I thought that the out years were just the run out of existing projects, so not a projection of what the spend will be in that year. What's interesting is if you look at the same page from last year, the 24-25 column was 1,091,000, close to that 1,091,000,000, close to that column. The 5-year total was within $4 million of the total. So what you don't know is I can see 500 million moved into this next year, but I don't know whether I had a whole bunch of projects completed and they fell out, whether I hold a whole bunch of projects deferred, which doesn't necessarily concern me, or whether I had some huge overruns that may or may not have still come in here. So one of the things that maybe is more relevant for us to be looking at here, I still might want to see that roll forward, is what's the change in the projected costs that are happening, and that does relate to an agenda item we've proposed for the future, so maybe that'll have our answers, because we talked about show us what contracts have changed by more than the 10% and $1 million. And again, I'm just trying to get my heads around what should we be looking at so we're using our time effectively. So I guess I'm back to that still could be of value if we could ballpark what are the projects out of that increase of 400 or 500 million. It's probably a couple $100 million that are deferrals. That doesn't concern me. It could be a couple $100 million of cost increases. Oh, that's not quite as good, maybe. Or do I not necessarily look at that and I simply separately look at what are the cost increases? So maybe that would be more important for us to look at to decide what's symptomatic of cost increases and what needs to happen for that to get better if possible.
Commissioner Newman, closing comments?
Yeah, okay. As I think about, when I asked the question about how much float will there be, has there been on an ongoing basis, the number was much bigger than I thought. I can understand a 10 or 20% a year roll, you know, and I understand the inflexibility because of where revenues come from, things like that, so that may be a factor. But are we taking a look at how we're planning our cash flow versus how we're managing it? Because that says to me that we're being really conservative, saying let's put the money up front so we make sure we have the money, and then we know we underperform on it, and then we get this bump in the rug that moves back every year. It makes it very hard to really plan and make decisions on budget strategy and things like that if we're doing that. So to me, there may be a really good answer that I don't know about, but it seems like a question needs to be asked.
You know, I think I'm going to try to speak to one thing quickly, but I think what I would recommend is maybe we come back to this conversation with better information for you and additional information regarding, you know, the confusion around some of this topic. But you know, that carry forward, we have to cut it off somewhere. So our cutoff is February because we have to put a budget together. And so when we cut it off in February, there's definitely going to be some of that carry forward that will be spent in this fiscal year that we don't need. So we do track that because when we look at what the budget is approved for, we look at it from a project by project basis. So for example, if this project is approved for 10 million and we have a cutoff of February just to do the budget, we might carry forward $1 million, but if you spent the whole $1 million, your project is still only 10 million. You didn't get 11 million. So I don't know if that makes sense or not, but I think what I would suggest at this time is, because we do have quite a lot of presentations that we still need to go over between today and Friday, so I would suggest that maybe we you know, work on some of these questions and some of this confusion and bring that back to you at some point, or maybe use the strategy of meeting with a couple of you like we did and go through that.
That's fair. It's just if you have a continual carry forward of that magnitude, it doesn't matter when you cut it off. That means we always have that amount.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter where you draw the line, July, February, wherever. It says to me that we're being conservative on the planning part of that and committing the funds up front, but then they're not really going to be used. And we can probably take a little more risk and be able to manage our projects. So.
Yep, I understand what you mean, and I agree. So we can look at that. Yes.
Page 5.
Okay, can we advance the slide? So over the next 3 meetings, we're going to have the various departments discuss some of their major projects that are in the 5-year CIP and give you a bit of information about those projects. We'll first talk about capital projects with dedicated funding sources. That will cover transportation, the ALCP program, water and wastewater, drainage flood control, the preserve, and park and recreation projects. Only the first 2 are on the agenda for today. The rest are scheduled to be covered in Friday's meeting. Could we go to the next? The next group of projects that we'll take a look at are those capital projects funded by bonds, the general fund, and other funding sources. In that grouping, we'll hear from Parks and Recreation, Public Safety, Enterprise Operations, Community Facilities, and IT projects. Next. Finally, we'll cover the categories of cost estimates included in the capital budget. We'll get into some detail about the reasons for changes in cost estimates, and then we'll have a discussion about projects that have seen cost increases of greater than $1 million and 10%, which Mr. Stevens alluded to. With that, I think Mr. Caton will be covering the next few slides.
Thank you, and if it pleases the chair and the commission, I'd like to pull an audible and skip my 3 slides that were gonna just provide an overview, just in the spirit of time. We have subject matter experts that were designated to come today, and with our limited time, they may not be available given schedules at future meetings. You get to see me every meeting, and so we could circle back to my portion if that pleases the chair and the commission.
Everybody's fine with that, I think. No, see no comment cards or comment requests.
Okay, with that, could you advance a few? There's one more slide I need to cover, and then I'll be done. That one, thank you. So as we move forward with the department presentations, each project that they discuss will have this table to provide some basic uniform details about each project. First, we have the project start date and the expected completion date, pretty self-explanatory. The initial total budget line is the total project budget when the project was initially approved. Next is the current approved total budget. It shows the current total project budget inclusive of any changes that were approved by the council. Next is the proposed total budget change. That is the amount of any proposed adjustment to the project budget in the CIP that we're looking at. The next line is the total proposed project budget, which is the total proposed project budget in the CIP. It's the sum of the previous 2 lines. Incurred to date is how much has been spent on the project to date. As Sonia mentioned, the cutoff is the end of February. And then the proposed budget for 25-26 is how much of the remaining project budget is scheduled for 25-26. This does not include any project expenditures that are scheduled for years 2 through 5 of the CIP. And then finally, importance of project is a brief summary of what the project is providing to the citizens. I'm sure the departments will go into more depth as they present and tell the story of their projects. With that, I believe that's.
I do have a comment or question from Commissioner Seitz.
Thank you. I'm very interested in the importance of project discussion. You talked about prioritizing as you go through. Oh, can you hear me now? You talked about the prioritization as you go through the process with the city manager and the staff, et cetera. I don't see importance or prioritization in the book. You're going to present them according to this slide. Is that a priority setting relative to other projects, or is it just a statement of how important it is to the community or to the city? Help me. I'm just very interested in what motivates a project to continue going, not just about the dollars and cents and available funds, but how important it is to continue it or to start it, stop it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Seitz. So as far as prioritization, if you go back to the slide that shows the funding sources, so for the projects that have dedicated funding, it's, so for example, the transportation 0.2% tax or the, preserve tax or whatever. We prioritize that within that department, along with whether it's the Transportation Commission or the Preserve Commission. So each of the departments, because it's within the funding source, it's not competing with other projects. So that project may be prioritized based on the transportation plan or based on the regional arterial life cycle strategies or plans, are based on some other prioritization, and also and the departments can speak to that more. And so, but what we asked them to do is we didn't ask them to select their top priority projects to present. What we asked them for is all the projects over 25 million, basically the large projects, and select one or two projects that they would like to highlight because they felt that it was important for the community and for the commission to see this project. But we didn't ask them to showcase or highlight the most important project necessarily. However, that said, probably the 25 million and asking them to highlight may probably be the most important project, but the prioritization process is kind of within the funds. The prioritization process I talked about earlier, where we work closely with the city manager and figure out what general fund monies are, whether it's operating or whether it's capital, that balance, those are only projects that do not have dedicated funding sources and require general fund monies. I don't know if that helps answer that question, but we can certainly explain more as you hear from each of the departments how they prioritize their projects.
Thank you. I'm sure there'll be more on that as we go through this.
Seeing no further questions from the dais, I think we can move on to item 4 on our agenda, which is the transportation capital improvement projects and related maintenance needs. Nathan?
Good afternoon, Chair Smith and Budget Review Commission. I am Nathan Domi, Transportation Planning Manager. I will be serenading you guys for the next 2 items on both the 0.2% sales tax as well as our HERF funding for our general transportation projects, and then item 5 being our ALCP and our 0.1% match on our major roadway reconstruction projects. So starting with item 4, I wanted to go over a brief overview of what our department is, how we kind of are organized, and what kind of roles each one of our individual sections of our department run, then pulling that into a cycle of life of how we establish our projects, and then going into, as Sonia described, our 2 examples of projects for this funding source. So next slide, please. So this is showing the same description that Scott had to show our existing projects and our new projects for this funding source. We've established that we're going to ask for 4 new projects coming forward with the 0.2% sales tax in the proposed. That is a signalized improvement to Goldwater and Camelback. We have already acquired federal funding for a safety improvement at that intersection. So it is a very small amount of our local match to use those federal funds. I guess that's a good segue into, Greg will definitely talk more about this, but we have lots of reasons why we put a project onto our prioritization list that we're requesting City Council to approve. 2 of the main reasons we would ask for something, or why it goes up on the list of prioritization, is us utilizing federal and regional funds and using those additional sources, so matching those funds and being able to allocate that as appropriate. And then also any kind of, I wouldn't say emergency maintenance needs, but maintenance in the transportation network that seems to be coming up and really needs a complete rehabilitation of that asset to extend its life. Those are 2 of the major reasons why something would shoot up of our list of why we're asking for prioritization. So Safety would be another one of those big concerns. So Goldwater and Camelback was a safety as well as a using of federal funds. Then we have a digital messaging sign upgrade project that we're proposing. This is the use of existing assets. If you see around the city, we have digital messaging signs that have gone into disrepair and are no longer activated. We would look to reactivate those. McCormick Ranch Shared Use Path is on the list as well. This is a project that we are looking to do a preliminary investigation, a conceptual design to see how much it would cost. But we've seen movement along the Indian Bend Wash at McCormick Ranch where the pedestrians and the bikes are crossing mid-block rather than at the intersection where they're designated to. So our traffic engineering has evaluated that and has determined that we need a pedestrian crossing along McCormick Parkway to facilitate better safety of movement. That will move them towards the southern portion of the road, and we would like to expand that sidewalk to possibly accommodate that new level of traffic. And then the final one is the 64th Street Canal Wall. We did an engineering assessment of it. There's some level of rehab that needs to happen on that wall, so more of an emergency need to go and fix that and make sure that it doesn't deteriorate any further, and that we keep that canal wall up and lasting. So those are our 4 existing projects for that, our 4 new projects for that 1.8 million in fiscal year 25-26 and the 4.3 in the upcoming years.
If I can stop you there and ask a question just to reconcile in my mind a couple of numbers. On an earlier slide in someone else's presentation, the pie chart piece labeled transportation sales tax, which I believe included these 2 components, the .2 transportation sales tax as well as the HERF money. The piece of that pie chart was $128.5 million.
Yeah.
And would that be comparable to the column you have, the 3rd column in proposed budget for next year, $106 million? And if so, what would the difference be?
So I was told that HERF is not in that pie chart. So that would be one of the differences. And then also that pie chart had the 2%, the 0.2 and the 0.1. So I guess that would be where any discrepancies would be. And so we could reconcile that and make those pie charts look like these numbers. But there would be 3 sources that are kind of working in tandem.
Thank you for that explanation.
Also, I guess we do have federal and regional funding that goes into all of our accounts. So that pie chart would just show our local contributions. Anything that I'll be showing has both regional, federal, stormwater, flood control. So we get from lots of different pots when it comes to projects, especially the ALCP. So going into our overview, so we have 5 general departments. I've separated out into transportation and then street operations. So right now I'm showing we have traffic engineering, transportation planning, and then transit. All of us do various degrees of effort on the capital side, transportation planning and traffic engineering. We collaborate into deciding what the scope of a project should be, especially the engineers looking at what safety improvements need to happen on there, as well as their development reviews. But these are the 2 departments that are working together to create that list of prioritization for capital projects. In tandem, we use and work with our street operations and our pavement preservation group to talk about the maintenance of the projects moving forward. So once we complete a capital project, we talk to street ops before and after to make sure that they are adding that back into their models for when maintenance needs to happen and occur. So they have their 5-year plans for when maintenance happens. Our street operations, they pave, they maintain 131 miles of our unpaved roads. I just wanted to highlight that they go out there and we have 131 unpaved roads up in the north area. They're constantly going out there, putting down some treatments on there so that it preserves and maintains those unpaved roads, as well as our pavement preservation. I'll be going into that a lot more in depth. One of the highlighted projects is the pavement preservation overlay project. When we do a pavement preservation project, ADA, we're required to improve the ADA ramps if they're out of compliance with any pavement project we do. That's a federal requirement. So they will go out there, and when they do a microseal or an overlay pavement project, they will address the ADA ramps as they go out there. Last year, they did about 100 ADA ramps, as well as a million square miles of a microseal in the year. The cycle of life, I'm not going to go into.
If I can,
Yeah.
I have a question from Commissioner Carla. Please go back to the previous slide.
Yes, thank you. I just have an overarching question, which is, how do you determine if you're building more than you can care for? You know?
Yeah.
Because maintenance has been a big thing amongst this commission. And, you know, I know that you're chasing the cars, and you feel you have to build the roads, et cetera, and everything. But at what point do you determine if you're building more than you can adequately care for and keep safe?
So a lot of times when we're talking about these major roadway projects, we're not adding substantially more pavement than we had before. So every time we do that, we will send it over to street ops. They will add it to the amount of pavement that they are preserving. And then as I'll go into, I'll show you that they have a modeling program that shows how and where we should go and preserve. So they run models over the pavement to find out what the pavement condition index is. So on all of our roads, they find out what the condition is. Then that they will run through and figure out what is the treatment necessary for that roadway to increase its abilities. Now, I'm getting to the point of the question is, we will use a goal of what we want our PCI to be, and then work backwards to figure out how much funding we need to achieve that PCI. So I have a graph to show how that works. But if we want a certain level of a PCI in the city, we can establish that kind of goal, figure out how much funding we would need to maintain that level, and then they will work in their model to figure out which roads would need to be treated throughout their 5-year plan in order for us to accomplish that level. When we add new roads, there's a federal project right now to add 2.8 miles of new paving. We will tell them that that's being added, and they will add that to their model and make sure that they are maintaining that to the best of their ability. Thanks.
So it is this group on the right-hand column, the pavement preservation. This is the group that determines what what work we need to repair and maintain the roads.
That is that group, yeah. They have the manager and the staff to run the model. They have consultants too that come in and run the model for them for their 5-year plan. So I'll skip over this very quickly now, but just to establish what our cycle of life of a project is. So we go through steps of scoping out a project, understanding what needs to happen. This is an example of Pinnacle Peak to Happy Valley, Pima Road, Pinnacle Peak to Happy Valley, one of the ALCP projects that will be talked about in the item 5. But so as we go through the planning, we look at what the traffic volumes are, what the needs are to create a roadway to both current standards as well as the ultimate configuration, just establishing what is the need for the project. Then we keep working with our capital project management team as well as transportation to work through the design to make sure that what we needed on that project is still established and see what other obstacles come out during the project. Inevitably, whenever we're doing a major roadway reconstruction project, we come into things that are in the existing condition that challenge us. And so we work through all of those and get the roadways done. That's through design and construction. And then, like I said, we pass that over to the maintenance crews to make sure that they have that in their model and make sure that they're maintaining it. So going into the 2 projects that are our examples. So I've pulled drink water Scottsdale intersection improvement. This was approved last fiscal year. We've just started the preliminary designs and alternative analysis of this. What the project is looking to accomplish is, if you can look on the aerial, as you come off of drink water and turn left onto Scottsdale Road, there is no signal there. We've seen that through the traffic counts that as the couplets were designed, they were intended to carry more traffic going north than coming south. But what we've seen is there is a even distribution of traffic going north and south off of Drinkwater. So the need is to establish a better turning movement coming off of Drinkwater onto Scottsdale. Since there's no signal there, but high volumes on Scottsdale, it bogs people up a little bit when they're trying to make that left-hand turn. So looking at alternatives right now to figure out what's the optimal solution to making that turning movement better, and then also going out to the public really soon to show those alternatives, and then moving forward with a preliminary design and a cost estimate based on the needs of the project, based on that 15% design to understand what we need to accomplish after we do the alternatives. So right now I have the total budget, it's at 6.2. That's around what we've seen our signals coming in as, dependent on right-of-way needs, utility, relocations, but that's a healthy budget that would allow us to change and reconfigure this intersection. And then
Let me stop you there and turn it over to Commissioner Seitz, whose business is probably a stone's throw away from this intersection, so she may be keenly interested.
Well, yes, it is, but my questions are more about what I was asking before. The importance of the project relative to important other projects. I think you talked a little bit about it, but are you looking at, are there accidents there because there's no left turn signal? It's just a lot more traffic than you originally designed for that corner. I'm trying to gauge how it's prioritized among others more than pick on that project.
Yeah, we definitely have a safety concern here, but it's mostly backing up and capacity or congestion. So those are the two balancing things that we look at every time we're doing a roadway project, right, is safety, collisions, and then capacity and efficiency of the roadway. So it's a mix of both here. We haven't had overwhelmingly bad accidents here. So I would say it leans more on the efficiency side, but with a turning movement like this, with a high volume going down Scottsdale, that concern would be there for that.
Yeah, I don't like that corner personally, but the second part of my question, I believe that maybe the design included traffic signals and things like that. My question is how and if, and I mean, how do you anticipate the impact to the operating budget for the completion of a project like this that very well could impact that operating budget?
So
Are
yes.
those funds then considered in your projections?
They are, and we do have a group that goes out and maintains our signals. So we have a whole operating side that is managing all of our assets. So whenever we finish a project, they're aware that, like I said, we're at the alternative stage now, so we're not too sure what would go in here. Once we find a preferred alternative, we would assess what the maintenance need is for our signal crews, and make them keenly aware that that would be going in, that they have a new intersection that they need to maintain.
Maybe I should step back in time and say projects that are completed in this budget, is the operating budget impact considered because that project is completed and now has an impact on the operating budget?
We could probably look to putting operating costs into the budget moving forward rather than relying on our 5-year plans or just telling street ops that a new asset is there and that they need to maintain in their operating budget. So we can work towards making sure that that gets incorporated into the budget. Okay. The next one is the pavement overlay program. So right here, I've shown 104th Street. This was a micro seal that was just done last year. We started the yearly account with $1.5 million in fiscal year 11-12. That was the established budget. So we've been doing this for about 15 years now. The way this works is it's a yearly account that we know how much we're spending, and we look to spend all of that yearly account. So as you talked about things carrying over, these ones we do not carry over. We look to spend it in the year account. So as you can see, it says YL, how we've done this previous years is the second letter indicates which year it was established. And once we spend down this account, it will drop off and then a new YM would be established, or YN as it moves forward. So it keeps rolling over to be a new account that we need to spend down within 2 years, but approved yearly. So on our budget prioritization, or the list that we send over to Greg, we have all of our Y accounts on there. They get approved every year, every budget cycle. That would show that we intend to spend this amount of money over the next 2 years to maintain various assets we have, payment being one of them. Currently, what we're looking at is a significant increase to the pavement overlay program this next fiscal year to go out there and accomplish more pavement and really work to get that PCI up to a level. So over the 5 years, we have budgeted out $100 million. For next fiscal year, we're looking at $26 million. Last year, we had a Y account of about 14 million. So going from 26 to 14 million for the yearly spend.
You said it was 14 million last year,
This year is 14 million.
or this year's. You have a frame of reference even further back than that? I mean, how much,
Yeah.
did we used to spend 20 million and dropped off, or what's the history?
It's always been increasing. So it started at 1.5 million and it's just steadily been increasing, and then got to 14 million last year. And now we've had a pretty sizable increase to 26 this year. So our need for pavement, it keeps growing, and we have a lot of miles of pavement that are out there.
Yeah. Commissioner Stevens?
Yeah, this is one of the contracts that helped me with a little bit more. Scott and Sonia, this wasn't included in the list we looked at before, probably because it hadn't been a proposed change yet, but I'm guessing this one would show up in the 10% million-dollar change based upon this change that's happening. And then help me, okay, right now what happened is we've gone through the entire year on this project, 8 months or so, and now in the new budget year, we're proposing a $20 million increase. Tell us more about the nature of that increase, and is that something that's not a surprise, could have been unforeseen? And what I'm getting after is, if council's had a lot of surprises, is there something they should have known about this? Because like some things are reasonably foreseen, or was this something that was a surprise once you started doing some of the digging?
I would say that it's not necessarily a $26 million increase or a $21 million increase. Like I said, every year we put in the yearly counts. So we would have requested 14 million again. So I would say it is a increase from 14 million to 26 million, not $26 million increase, but that would be the increase. So just the numbers alone, we always request the yearly account, so the increase would have been from the 14 million previous year to 26, not the $26 million increase. But sorry, Craig.
Yeah, I would just add, Mr. Chair and members of the commission, I think this is a great example of a program that addresses what the commission has been talking about, which is, I'll call it replacement, but in this term, First Street, I'll call it preservation. So this is how
We call it potholes.
There you go. So, and what happens, a little bit back to some of the earlier questions about adding for growth. So I'll just quickly kind of take it through my mind. We have a growing community. In some areas, we add that, and we add pavement. And at some point, you reach a point where you had to add more staff because you've added lane miles. We do lane miles. So we've got to restripe it, we have to, or contractual. So we add to the contract as we outsource a lot of our work. Then over a period of time, those roads deteriorate. And so we have, I'll call it a level of service. We have a level of service for intersections, and transportation is expanded to maintain or increase a level of service. And if you don't, then you decrease level of service to community. And then we also have kind of a level of service as a part of that asset. We characterize it here as pavement condition index, and the community sets kind of a standard for that quality of what they want for that assessment. We have outsourced this where they come in and do our roads and look at it and give an assessment for the condition. And then what we do is apply different types of treatments to maintain or elevate. And as you add more roadways, we'll need to increase the annual replacement. So this is not just one project. This is the preservation system, preserving the system, which for this street will take fog seal. This one will take a pavement overlay. This one will do well, not probably reconstruct to be a separate, more significant, but the lighter measures are included here. And all of that comes together as the pavement preservation project, but it's multiple lane miles, it's multiple areas throughout our community. And as we grow, this number has gone from 1.5 to 26 million. And then we'll do a pavement condition index and say, we're at some number, and do we like that number, which creates potholes, cracks, et cetera, or do you want a higher pavement condition index, which is a higher quality, and then what is that number or investment to get that asset up to that level that is of a community value?
Yes.
Vice Chair Swiger has a question.
We all know that pavement has been deteriorating and everything. So is this an example of something that was underfunded for many years and now you're having to play catch up when you're going from like 10 million to 14 million? Because I think that we all hear the complaints about potholes being bad and everything. And one of my questions is this something where we could improve by actually bringing more things in-house rather than outsourcing them? Because my understanding is that we don't even do our own crack sealing ourselves. And is there a way that we could do more with the same amount of money?
Mr. Chair and Commissioner, I'll take the last question first. And I think that's an opportunity to look at outsourcing versus in-house work. And after we get done with this budget, should there be interest in taking areas of interest by staff, you could be that sounding board, this commission, should that be of interest to you and council, to bring something forward. And I'll just use your example, it's a great example, and say, we can outsource this work and is charged this amount of money. And side by side, what would it take to do crack fill, fog seal, some of those other lighter treatments in-house, staff, equipment, so on and so forth, and present that and get feedback on how we should move forward. Because those are clearly two different approaches. I will tell you, newer to this organization, we outsource much more than I'm used to and familiar with, and so that's something of consideration. To your first question, I think I would answer it by my perspective, accumulation of a number of factors. The asphalt is deteriorating at a level, and I will tell you that one thing I would like to consider this commission thinking about is not just the 26, but we have a project that is Thomas Road, and from about 56 to 73. And that is $19 million, as I understand. And it's a failed roadways. We will have to do a total reconstruction. And I would submit that if we delay that, that is going to be more next year, but it's only inflation. There are some streets that I would refer to on the bubble, and speaking of opportunity costs, just lose that 19 million, that we could invest in a lighter treatment in our system that will save us additional dollars in the future. Said another way, and don't take this literal, but I think if we swapped that 19 million and spent it, if we don't do that, it'll cost us 30 or more million on those streets that are failing that we're not getting to next year. We can have further discussion about that. That's a concept that we're still exploring internally. Admittedly has varying sides of that argument, but that's the trade-off. That's an opportunity cost. That's a trade-off when you get to a roadway that has failed, because it's failed today and it's going to be failed next year. There are a good number of roads that I think with the surge, I'll use that term, surge in investment will save us money down the road because they're on the bubble from potentially getting to an extremely expensive treatment measure, and we can show those on the light end of the spectrum, a fog seal, a crack fill, and a fog seal, all the way up to a total reconstruction. That cost is astronomical on the gap there.
Commissioner Stevens.
I'm sorry, I just don't understand what is this for? It's $100 million over the next 5 years, so what's this project, or is this like, hey, we're gonna spend $100 million on roads because we know we need it? Or is there specific, these roads during these years?
So, yes and no. So it's a program, so it is roads that come out of our model that need some level of treatment. Our pavement preservation group right now we just finished the previous 5-year plan. They are coming up with the next 5-year plan, which would have the roads that would need treatments. So they are using, through our vendor, they're working on that list of 5 years worth of pavement treatments, which is a pretty lengthy list of roads to be put on, but that's...
So this project is really the result of a periodic assessment you did of overall road conditions in Scottsdale and what needs to be attended to over the next 5 years?
Yes.
To get your PCI up to the level you want it at?
Yes.
Okay, so this change you would consider more of a scope increase, I guess, because this really couldn't have been foreseen? Or if it could have been foreseen, should we be budgeting more for this kind of stuff?
I would say we have 910 miles of lane miles of asphalt, and so we could always use more money in the asphalt stuff. So it's a scope increase, but pavement preservation and maintaining the roadways, it's as far as you want the dollar to stretch. So I can go over to the next slide to show that it's really a matter of establishing what PCI you, like Greg said, what PCI you want to be at, and then establishing the budget on that. So this is something that was done at the first 5 years ago. They're creating a new chart, so I would say that these numbers are out of date per what I'll show in item 5 of the inflation costs we've been dealing with, but drawing a line of how much we will need to spend in order to raise the level of PCI. If we establish a goal of a certain level of PCI, this chart would show that on the bottom axis how much annual budget we would need to maintain that. That's not talking about getting us up to that level, but what level of investment we would need to maintain that level of PCI. So currently, our staff is looking at modeling what needs to be done to achieve a 70, a 73, a 75, and a 77 to give us a budget estimate of what that number would need to be in order for us to achieve that. So to answer the question, it's really how high do we want to go up in the PCI and what do we want to invest in and put our investment into. So we always need to maintain the pavement on the road. It's always deteriorating out there. It's constantly deteriorating. So it's what do we want to get to and how fast do we want to get to it?
I have a comment or a question from Commissioner Newman.
I just want to comment, I 100% support this because the costs are going to go up 5x. Instead of spending $100 million, be spending $500 million to replace roads. And to avoid the base failures that are inevitable, this is the only way to get there, and to be aggressive about it. I applaud the effort, so I totally support that. Now the question is it based on 70, 73, 75 cost as a function, but also how many calls do you get from people?
Yeah.
And empirically derived, I guess.
And that's true.
But I totally support it.
And so going back, one slide back, it's kind of a balance, like Greg said, about how do we achieve preservation versus reconstruction versus overlay. So this is a chart to show kind of the level of PCI and the level of treatment that would be needed if we reached a certain PCI on a certain roadway. So as we show here, preservation, we can extend life if we maintain things in that preservation threshold.
Yeah, I come from Chicago, so PCI of 12 was considered a victory. So
I have a question or comment from Vice Chair Swiker.
Yeah, and just for my fellow commissioners, for a frame of reference, Paradise Valley went from 77 down to 73, and they're now putting together a plan to get back to 77 because they're not satisfied with the 73.
And I have a couple of questions, and then Commissioner Stevens has questions too, but this PCI of 62 that we're estimated to be at now, can you give us a historical number of where we were 5 years, 10 years ago, or whatever?
5 years ago, about 65. Before that, varying degrees of 70 possibly. So it's, we can find those numbers for you, but it was around 65. 62 is low for us.
So we're playing a little bit of catch up.
Yeah.
Another question, there is obviously a handicap in using average numbers because they can hide problem childs. And what I mean by that is if you, I don't know how many lane miles we have of roads in Scottsdale that you're in charge of maintaining. You probably know that number, but some of them are brand new, and they'll have a PCI of 100 if such a thing is possible.
It is, yeah.
And others will be ancient by the city standards and have a deteriorated number that may be down in the 45 or whatever. Can you give us a distribution of what makes up this average? Because I know there's some roads that are a lot worse than 62.
Yeah. No, we have that for every roadway. And over the course of the last couple of years, we've been prioritizing the arterials and the collectors for the volume of vehicles on there. So the decrease is because we have such a massive volume of local roads. So we're trying to, I guess, get our bang for our buck based on number of vehicles using that roadway. But certainly to get the PCI up, we would need to transition to looking more at the local roads again and prioritizing that as we move forward. But we have a breakdown of every roadway. Their model, I've seen it, it's interactive. You can dive into any of the roadways and see what the PCI was recorded at for that road.
I think it would be somehow informative if we said we have 1,000 lane miles of roads in the city and 300 of them are in the 80 to 90 category and 600 of them are in the whatever category. And
yeah, we have a breakdown via pie chart of what's in good condition, what's in fair condition, and about off the top of my head, I think it was 35% were in 65 and up, but don't quote me on that, anybody, because I would have to relook at that pie chart.
See if you can come up with something like that for a future meeting as a piece of information for us, because I do believe it would add a sense of urgency to the problem that you're facing, that some of them, 62 overall may be masking some real problems underneath.
No, of course. We already have that produced, so it's just a matter of bringing the right material over, as well as we have a breakdown by local and our major roadways.
Thank you. And Commissioner Stevens.
Okay, I understand you're just going to be authorizing the 25-26 amounts, and the future forecast numbers are subject to future authorization, if I understand this right. But what do you do from an estimation standpoint to try to get the 25-26 numbers as close as you can? What do you use in your estimation? Do you have contracts bid out, or are you using estimation tools, or what do you do? And then what do you do for the out years, which are maybe not as important, but still kind of important to get ballpark close?
Yeah, so for the out years, we'd be using our 5-year plan to establish the budget moving forward. So what our group's able to accomplish in those next couple of years. And if we increase it over what that 5-year plan would say, we could easily just incorporate more roads in it based on the capacity of our pavement preservation team. And then for this budget and how it got increased, we have several on-call contracts with contractors that go out and do it. So it's not a matter of based on their contract, but if we ask them to go out and do more roads, they would schedule it and be able to accommodate us to put it out. So if we increase the budget, that's just they'll be able to generate that work and work for us on our on-call contract.
So the on-call contracts, are those the ones that are like $5 million and below or something, like I think council had a bunch of those they had to approve on the agenda last night.
Those are not the ones. We have separate ones for the
It's
paving.
like that.
But it's like that.
Okay, so do you have like sketched out, here's the roads we think we're gonna do in 25, 26, and either I have contracts or reason to believe if I bid these out, this is what it's going to be on the on-call people, and then you use something a little rougher for the out years?
No, we would have a 5-year plan. So we have a spring and fall schedule of at least on our end, looking at the restriping of those pavement things. So they will send it over to planning and engineering to look at the restriping. When we go and we do a pavement, we have to restripe it based on our current standards. So they will send out a list of all of the pavement treatments they're going to do over the next various months in the spring and the fall throughout the whole year. So they will send that big list. That list is compiled working with their on-call contractor to figure out what their capabilities are, how many roads they can accomplish in that time frame. That all spans or stems from the 5-year plan, where we have it laid out each fiscal year what we plan to accomplish. If we can't get to all of them, they'll roll over to the next year, but we generally try and plan to get all of them accomplished. But I guess we do have a big list of all the roadways for each fiscal year. If the budget increase, we'll add more. It'll roll up and we'll add more from the next fiscal year onto that fiscal year and just add more to the back end, if that makes sense.
Let me go with that for now. You've got a very clear picture in your head, and I'm trying to grab it, but
I guess our roads are always deteriorating, so there's always going to be more roads that can be put on that list. So if they didn't meet the need for the 5-year plan, we'll just go down the next list. But we have the list of every road in the city. There's a cutoff for that 5-year plan of what we can accomplish. If we get more funding, it will just go further down that list and accomplish more roadways.
So you kind of view this as an authorization to spend $100 million over the next 5 years and do as many of the roads you can and get the PCI up?
Yes.
Is that kind of what this is?
That's what it is.
Okay, so what would be a reason why this might go up another 20 million next year? Or is this one going to be done and you're on to something else?
It's probably going to stay at, I can't say what it is. So we approve it every year. So next year, based on the needs of pavement that year, we can increase it or decrease it. But we work off of what the previous fiscal year is. So we would probably start with the 26 million, see what roads can be accomplished. And if we want to increase the number of roads, we'll increase the budget.
Let me have the city manager chime in here on this.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just add, he's saying it extremely well, but just to support my colleague there, this study that should be done in, it feels like a month-ish, of evaluating our roads as they are now. And we will get an updated number of PCI. And then we have a discussion as a community, as council, as what is acceptable and what do we want. And then as articulated, there is, whatever number you're at, there is a financial contribution that you need to make to maintain that. And then every single year. So it's a little bit of a misnomer calling this a project. It's multiple projects, and there's pros and cons to wherever this goes in the budget, but it's an ongoing, continual. And there's, again, back to what we set the value at, let's just use the 62. Heard some other numbers. I'm familiar with other numbers. And let's just say a value is 70, that we want to have 70. There are benefits to a higher number. One, you start to the charts, you treat them at a cheaper rate, not as expensive. You have less calls for potholes. You have things of that nature. And so then that takes an investment. And the $26 million, it will take more than $26 million to increase that number. That is so a non-PE's estimate of it, so that it doesn't slip. And so then we say we are able to invest 30. We're able to invest 40. What does it take to get us to 68? What does it take us to get to 70? What does it take us to get even higher, and so on and so forth? And then, so that's the surge amount, should there be support for that, to get up to a higher level, whatever we feel comfortable with. And then there's a an amount every single year to maintain that new number, which is going to be higher than the 26 million, highly likely. So that's where we're headed. And then should they get some good bids, what I've seen is you do an extra strip, you do an extra street, something comes in line where something's deteriorating faster through the year. And so then you, or through the 5-year plan, and then you're able to be nimble and adapt to address those so that you don't get into a more costly investment in some areas.
So is this broadly a PCI improvement plan over 5 years?
I'm struggling with the improvement, to be honest with you. It's a pavement preservation, and at a certain number, you're not preserving at the previous year's PCI. You're actually a pavement deterioration plan if you don't invest enough. Okay. And what we will submit for policymakers to consider is a pavement improvement PCI plan, absolutely. And that would at least take 26.4 million over next year, and likely more to increase that PCI.
Commissioner Ransco.
I suspect in a month you'll have a plan, and in a month after that, we'll have a PCI vote, and then you can write a 50-year plan, because you'll have the PCI number, you already know your streets, and you can tell us for the next 50 years when each street is going to get treated, and I mean, it can almost get that intelligent.
I'm not sure where we left you off, but if you can find out where you are, resume.
I'm at questions now, so if there's any more questions, then
You may have exhausted all the questions up here for now. I do have a question for the staff and the fellow commissioners. We have one item left on the agenda. We've probably worn out our welcome here. Should we move that to the first item on Friday? Is that possible with whoever the presenters are? And what do my fellow commissioners say to that? Commissioner Carlin.
Well, to use one of your favorite terms, then we're just kicking the can down the road. So my question is, how long do you think the next will take? I mean, could we get through it in an expedient fashion? Or do the fellow commissioners have a lot of, questions that they think they're going to be asking because they did read this ahead of time?
we're going to be talking a lot about inflation. So major roadway projects and inflation. So it could take some time.
And, okay, that's okay, that is
I'm
important.
happy to stay here. I'm happy to come back on Friday.
Well, the question is to Sonia then is what on Friday will get bumped?
Any other commissioners want to weigh in on this question, or shall we just charge ahead with item 4? Vice Chair Schweiker.
Yeah, I think if we're going to be getting into inflation, which is one of those topics which I think is going to be pretty weighty and everything, I don't think we want to rush through that one. So at least from my point of view, if possible, I'd like to do it first thing Friday.
Show of hands, yeas or nays? What's the? For whether we go ahead with item 4 here.
My only
item
note I had in my advanced reading was whether or not certain of the contracts that are being bumped up are going to be part of the 10%, $1 million, and that was the only question I had, so we can skip it if you want.
Commissioner Carla.
I go back to my question, which is then realistically looking at Friday, what's going to get bumped off of Friday?
That would be up to the commission. I mean, we have an agenda for Friday for various items, and the commission can decide what they want to hear and what will be bumped, or whether we can hear all of it on Friday.
Okay, well, maybe we take this one off now because it is so important, it's inflation. We add it to the beginning of Friday, but just as we move through Friday, we try and be a little bit more expedient.
Why don't we do this? Why don't we have you go through item 5? We will try to restrain ourselves, tough as that may be, in our questions and whatever. And if we have additional questions that look like they're going to take a long time, we'll carry some of those questions over. In other words, make yourself available on Friday as well, if you can, for further questions that may come to mind in the next 48 hours.
That's no problem. I work right across the road.
So then we are moving into the Transportation Arterial Life Cycle Program and the associated 0.1% transportation sales tax, and Nathan is going to walk us through that.
Yep. So I'm going to talk briefly about the program as a whole, where we've progressed so far as a city in doing these arterial life cycle projects, and then open up to the projects that remain in the budget that are over $25 million, and the breakdown, as Scott had, of each one of those. So going into the existing projects versus new projects, we're coming on the tailor end of the Prop 400 ALCP. Prop 400 was passed in 2004. It had a list of projects for us to do. So we are at the tailor end of that. So no new projects, just the existing projects, and just working our way down to funding them, completing them, and finishing them off. So Prop 400, the arterial life cycle project, is arterial roadway construction as well as capacity increases. These are these projects. I have on the screen right now one of our earlier Prop 400 ALCP projects that was completed. This was the very southern end of North Pima that tied into the Loop 101. It was a complete reconstruction of an arterial roadway, as you can see from the before and after, bending it more to the east and adding capacity to the neighborhoods in the northern area of Scottsdale. So the arterial life cycle project is defined as arterial projects to be funded through December of 2025. The biggest portion of that is the regional sales tax is the majority of funding for these projects. So the region contributes 70% of the funding of these projects. It's a 20-year sales tax. It was extended from the previous Prop 300. Prop 400 it expires coming up at the end of this year, and it's administered by the Maricopa Association of Governments, which we are part of, and we collaborate with them closely on these projects. Our local responsibility is to manage the projects, get the reimbursements, but most importantly, provide the 30% local match for these projects. They provide 70%, we provide 30%. And how we've done that since 2019 is the Scottsdale voters approved the 0.1% sales tax to provide that match for these arterial life cycle projects. On the bottom, you can see as of the fall, recently finished Miller-Hayden Bridge that crosses over the Rawhide Wash, another arterial expansion rather than upgrade. The goals of the arterial life cycle program is to widen existing streets to their ultimate need, improve intersections, construct new arterial segments, and then most importantly, bring existing streets to their current standards and ultimate configuration. So that's adding medians, curb, gutter, stormwater improvements, signal improvements, everything that goes into a street. So a full upgrade and completion of these roadways. This one's showing the Pima on the south end next to Indian Bend, going from a 2-lane, kind of a 3-lane road to its ultimate configuration being a multi-use path on one side, medians, curb, gutter, and sidewalk on the SRP MIC side. So just to give an example as to what these projects are accomplishing as they are getting done. We started in 2005 with 12 projects, mostly focusing on the north-south arterial, so Scottsdale and Pima being the primary routes. We had Loop 101 interchanges currently under construction right now. The interchanges themselves are an ALCP project. The widening of the Loop 101 is an ADOT funded project. Then we have signals and intersections on Shea. We've done a complete or a rehab of several roads in the Air Park area, including Raintree, which we'll talk about a little later on, and then Happy Valley being a little spur coming off of Pima. So the majority of it being that Scottsdale and Pima route up north and finishing off those roadways. As of spring of '24, we have, so as we were accomplishing these projects, we split them into 39 smaller projects. It's a massive stretch and it's a massive roadway reconstruction. So splitting them off into smaller projects, more bite-sized, helped us accomplish it. So far, we have completed, as of spring of '24, we completed 18. We've just, as the fall of '24, completed 3 more. So 3 of those under construction have now been completed. So we have 2 under construction, 3 that were nearing construction have now started construction, and then we have the 5 remaining in design, and then waiting for development based on developer needs. We would require the development next to those roadways to fund those projects. So far, by the end of 2024, we've completed 74% of the ALCP, and by 2026, we will have completed 83% of it. Nearing completion, so we have completed Pima, Happy Valley. I'm going to just skip this slide for brevity because we're going to go into all of these later on in the ones. But the 101 is still under construction. It is going to be done in the winter of '25, as well as we will be started the other 2 at the bottom there, Jomax to Dixoletta and Via Linda to McDowell. SRPMIC is leading that, so you don't see that as one of the $25 million investments in our ALCP because the majority of the funding is coming from SRPMIC, but that is a $80 million roadway project going from Via Linda down to McDowell, managed and run by SRPMIC that we are contributing to. 5 remaining projects is going to be Pima Stagecoach to Cave Creek, Pima Los Piedras, Dynamite to Los Piedras, Carefree, Cave Creek to Scottsdale Road, Dixoletta to Carefree, and Pima Happy Valley to Jomax. I'll be talking about the 4 top ones later. Happy Valley, Pima Happy Valley to Jomax is just basically a continuation of what was just completed between Pinnacle Peak and Jomax. Just not adding an additional 3rd lane, but keeping it to 2 lanes, curb, gutter, medians. So just a continuation of that project. I wanted to start the next series of topics with the projects by starting with what we've seen with cost increases over the last 4 years. We've seen a historic surge in construction costs, particularly on roadway projects. This is coming from MAG, sourced by ADOT, so they gave a presentation on this, showing several other examples of ALCP projects across the region. They have seen similar increases that we have seen to the budgets, but earthwork being 230% from 2020 to 2024, asphalt being 105% of an increase, concrete pavement 53%, drainage 75%, structural concrete 126%, and reinforced steel a 24% increase. All of those are things that go and compile into our roadway projects, adding to this surge in costs that have been really hitting us hard, especially on the ALCP. So going into the ALCP itself, tasked with showing all the projects that are 25 million or over. So starting with Raintree, Scottsdale Road to Hayden Road. This was just completed as of November of '24. The initial budget as approved by us in MAG was 19.3 million. At the end, we got to 27 million. So the total approved budget was 37 million. The total approved budget was 39 million. We had about $2 million left over. We currently have it in the budget to transfer that over to another ALCP project. When we're talking about the 0.1% sales tax and the regional sales tax, those are dedicated to just these ALCP projects. So if we have any cost savings, we will roll those over to future ALCP projects as any of the Prop 400 projects for the 1% sales tax as well as the regional. So The importance of this project, as well as all the other projects, are going to be that regional arterial, that regional significant arterial. Another purpose of the ALCP is so that there's consistency, not just in our community, but across the jurisdictional boundaries. So if you're going to Tempe, if you're going to Carefree or Cave Creek or Paradise Valley, there's consistency of the roadways in terms of those major arterials. So I can pause to talk about this project if you want, or I can just continue through all of them. The cost increase, as I showed in the previous slide, was due to those inflation costs, but the other factors that come up in all of these projects I will repeat on them, is right-of-way costs have gone up, as you've seen from housing values and property values. We have to pay those if we're going to acquire right-of-way. And then stormwater impacts and improvements have definitely gone up as well, as you've seen in the inflation, but adding those and elevating the road have gone up significantly as well. So those three factors have gone to driving the cost of our projects up. And going to Pinnacle Peak to Happy Valley, Pima Road, Pinnacle Peak to Happy Valley, this was also completed in November of 2022. This was going from $22 million to $50 million. That was not all ALCP and 1% sales tax. If you see in the picture that big drainage channel, that was a necessary improvement to the road based on the massive amount of flows going through that area when it rained. So we did acquire a lot of flood control district money as well as our stormwater fees to accomplish that surge in costs. So when a surge in cost comes up, we don't just come straight to get to the sales tax or come to just look. We will look for additional revenue sources, most importantly being stormwater fees or stormwater or flood control district money to try and balance that out. Because stormwater, especially in the northern portion and those roadways up north, stormwater is the biggest or one of the biggest components too when we're doing these roadways. So that was about, I would say $13 million of it was stormwater funding that came into it, and then the rest of it was still our transportation, regional and local sales tax. Happy Valley, Pima Road to Alma School, very similar situation, very similar scenario. So going from 12 million to 37 million based on inflation, stormwater, and then right-of-way costs to finish that. It was finished up in November of 24, and we have now finished both Pima and Happy Valley, probably alleviating those residents up there with the construction that we've had going on for a while, but some significant improvements for the capacity up in that region. Scottsdale, Jomax to Dixoletta, this is under construction right now, going from 23 million to 43 million. There's several other things that I can note to that increase that not just the same three that I've been talking about. Those still apply here with the inflation, right-of-way costs, and the stormwater impacts. But we also found utility constraints. APS has some pretty massive electrical wires underground here. When we were putting in our culverts, they came into contact, and APS has prior rights here, which means that we would have to pay for we're making the conflict point, so we would have to we'd have to pay for the relocation of their wire. That was several $1 million to relocate 69 kV, so pretty high level voltage going on through there. So that compounded with both the inflation, right of way, and then also the stormwater came to that increase. So we're looking to get this done by December of 2026, and like I said, under construction right now. Carefree Highway, Cave Creek Road to Scottsdale Road. This is under design right now. We're finishing up design relatively soon. This budget is also increased based on stormwater. Less so about right-of-way on this one. We've tried to limit the right-of-way take. We have Carefree bordering us right on the northern end, and they're not very interested in us acquiring right-of-way. So we're trying to mitigate that as much as possible, which adds a little bit of improvement to a little bit of cost to the stormwater as we combat that. But stormwater and then the inflation are the factors that are coming into this one. And then Scottsdale, Dixoletta Drive to Carefree Highway. I will talk about this one, as well as Pima, Los Piedras to Stagecoach. These are the two last remaining ones that are both Scottsdale and Pima, the very northern ends, the longest stretches as well. And so we are currently in a conceptual design phase. We've got 2 consultants on board to look at these. I've said over the past 5 or 6 projects that we've come across the same issue again and again and again that's increased the budget. We're looking to understand and evaluate that now before we start just seeing constant increases. So we've seen the inflation, we've seen the right-of-way, we've seen the utilities, and we've seen the stormwater. So as our 2 consultants go in to evaluate that, they're looking primarily at those to give us a clearer picture of what's needed moving forward. So we're going to get those assessments back, do an estimate based on those assessments, and have a clearer picture of that. MAG, Carefree has an ALCP project that goes from Stagecoach to Cave Creek Road. They couldn't get somebody to bid on their design. So they asked us if we could tag team a preliminary design to evaluate the road all the way from Cave Creek Road all the way down to Los Piedras. We said we would, and MAG has pitched in the funding to do that study. So they have put in $250,000 to do that preliminary design evaluation for that roadway. But so those are the 2 projects that are left outstanding. About 2030 is what's happening. I know that earlier in the slide I said that the funding stops in 2025. We have been at our regularly scheduled MAG meetings, and they have talked about while the funding stops being collected, we are allowed to move forward with that funding and with the projects moving forward past the 2025 mark. So they are extending Prop 400 to be completed, for all the projects in Prop 400 to be completed. So that's the status of those 2 projects. This one, Pima Road, Dynamite to Los Piedras, has had an increase as well. That is, and the picture will show, that is a large portion to stormwater. This is right at the Rawhide Wash, the starting point on Pima, and we have a consultant on board looking at alternatives for how we elevate the road to make sure that we keep a dry crossing going through that area. Hopefully not elevating it too much for noise mitigation around the neighbors. So it's a very dicey situation when it comes to the Rawhide Wash right there. As you can see, as the modeling of the flows go, it's going right into the Dixoletta and Pima intersection, which makes it even more complicated. So we've got one of our best stormwater consultants on the team to try and give us some reasonable alternatives to mitigate that problem. So that's the biggest thing going on here. We're at the design phase right now. We've got about 60% design, and they're looking at that problem happening right there. We've got the preserve on the east side, we've got neighborhoods on the west side, and then we've got the wash going straight through the middle. So definitely a lot of things converging at one point to make a challenging situation for us. And so that is my rundown of all of our final ALCP Prop 400 projects as they're nearing completion.
That was a speedy presentation. Thank you very much. And I think I'm going to ask 2 or 3 questions, and we can carry the questions over to the next meeting if they're complicated or necessary in the interest of time. But on these projects, and I don't have any question about a specific project, but just generally on these ALCP projects, are we in charge of the project? Are we the ones that actually design and hire the labor and services and whatever? Do we do the whole thing and then just send the county a bill for their 70% share of the cost?
Yes.
And they willingly pay that without regard to whatever?
They want us to get these projects done. They have allocated the money for these arterial projects at the start of Prop 400, and now Prop 479, it dedicated these specific projects. So when we send in the reimbursement, they're more than happy to send back the money, because.
And obviously, my question is, they didn't sign up for this level of cost. They signed up for the project, but obviously when the costs go up, I wanted to know who's responsible for answering the questions.
And I guess to that, as I said at the beginning, This is not just something that's happening to us, it is across the region. MAG, as they presented, they fully understand. All of the cities are talking to them about these cost increases. It is every city that is in the ALCB program is seeing the same thing. So MAG is fully aware and accommodating of these concerns.
And I would say that while you had a chart that talked about inflation, I'm not convinced that, you know, all of these projects are the result of that inflation. I mean, many of them went up 100%, 200%, and you know, you only have 2 lines on there that have gone up over 100%. So I'm curious to know, is there something else going on here other than inflation, or I just don't want us to hide behind the excuse, you know, that, well, inflation did it to us. And then third, and you know, hold the question to see what others have, but the third question I have a curiosity about is, where will we stand on the collections against the 0.1 ALCP tax by the time it is scheduled to expire? Will it have generated all the matching money that we need for all these projects, or will it have done more or less or whatever?
Yeah, so far it looks like it'll do a little bit more, but we definitely have the need for it. And then as Prop 400, Prop 479 comes in, we could still push that towards more ALCP projects.
Commissioner Newman?
Thank you. Just a question, a clarification question. I didn't see Rio Verde Drive East up there, and I know there's a lot of work going on there now with fire hydrants, things like that, but you can see that they're obviously going to widen the road at some point. Is that a project that's below 25 million, or is it off the horizon, planning horizon, or is Maricopa County doing it?
That's, developers are doing that for us. We've asked them to do it, and so it's not an ALCP project.
Okay. As far as a future project, is the future widening of that road going to be a Scottsdale project, or is that Maricopa County?
It is a Scottsdale project,
But it's off the planning horizon.
very in the long term.
Yeah, okay. That answers a question.
But it is our jurisdiction to widen that road,
So, okay.
at least to our border.
Okay, yeah, right. So, thinking about the conversation we had on the last slide deck and this slide deck, what's coming into focus for me, and I think this may, if there's recommendations that come out of the Budget Commission to the council, it seems, you know, there's some limited discretionary things that we can do, you know, how quickly you fund pensions, how quickly you pay off debt, roads. After seeing this presentation, I feel like, gosh, the risk of not doing this is really high. I know you're going to have a report very soon, but I almost think of this as a basal bolus program. You know, you've got a basal of catch up on PCI. There's the PCI catch up. There's the arterial projects that you want to get done, and then there's a few base failure projects that need to get done. But it seems like over a 5-year period, if that's a top priority to get that done, now you're down to just PCI maintenance over time, and that becomes like 20 million a year, 30 million a year, whatever that is to maintain how many road miles you have, but it's very predictable then. Right now, it's not so predictable because you've got roads that are failing faster than maybe we're maintaining them. It sounds like, I mean, I don't know, but it just sounds like we're not putting enough into that maintenance part to keep up with it. So it seems like this has to be a really high priority, because then you start having to take away from other discretionary priorities to fund base failures and things. So it seems to me like we're on the edge of kind of slipping into a bottomless pit of spending here, because the calls are going to be coming in, and everybody here working really hard is going to be taking phone calls rather than fixing roads and things like that. So I just think if there's a priority, Commissioner Smith, if there's a priority that comes out of this, right now where I'm thinking is that roads becomes a pretty high priority on the catch-up part of this, to get Scottsdale where it needs to be over the next 5 years, and as far as understanding the budget. So that's just my comments.
So, and to that, the ALCP, those roadways that are part of that have never been fully designed, right? They don't have their curb and gutter, they don't have their medians. So to your point, if we don't do those, then they still have their wet crossings. They're not to their ultimate configuration or to current modern standards to be what we would find as an appropriate roadway going forward.
I live up there. I kind of like the rural nature of it, but
oh, sorry.
A nicer road would be nice.
Commissioner Stevens.
I just want to thank you for answering my only question if you incorporated stormwater and right-of-way into the earlier stage project. So thank you for the lesson learned. And with that, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Commissioner
Not yet.
Carla may have you, she may want to do that ahead of you.
I tried.
I just have a very quick follow-up to what Commissioner Newman asked about Rio Verde Drive. We've been waiting on a critical preserve project related to it for 20 years, and Friday that project's going to come up, so you might get asked specifically when it's going to happen or when it's in transportation's timeline. So just, we may need that answer by
this-
Friday.
Which one is this?
Rio Verde Drive, the ultimate widening to 4 lanes.
Okay, yeah. I mean,
Thank you.
there's no timeline for it yet. It's just in the plan as a long-term improvement, but there is no timeline right now for it.
I had a motion from Commissioner Stevens to adjourn the meeting. Do I have a second? Carla seconds. No. Oh, Carla wants to say something else. Yes, I'm sorry. We do have an item 6 on the agenda, which is to identify and approve possible future agenda items. So I will ask if anybody has an item that they would like to request, and we don't talk about it, we don't discuss it, we don't debate it, we just vote on whether to include it or not. Commissioner Carla would now like to.
Yes, 2 quick things. Last meeting or so, Commissioner Stevens brought up the whole issue of addressing FTEs and, possibly looking at cutting some. And that's a great conversation, but I've been thinking about it and talking to departments. And could we add 2 other items to that discussion, which is the issue of overtime and then also the issue of staff burnout? Because I don't see how you discuss cutting FTEs without looking at, getting the jobs done versus what services won't be provided, and those are related to overtime and staff burnout. And then the second one is also, Commissioner Stevens brought this up today, where he's struggling with what we're accomplishing and where we're getting, which I agree with. And what I would like to suggest is, to the agenda, we have 3 meetings the second week in April. And maybe on one of them, we put an agenda item, which is basically a gut check of where we are, and everybody can communicate to the chair what they're looking at. Because the reality is most of what we've talked about is going to be pushed to the next cycle, because it's a much more in-depth discussion than making a recommendation now. But I would just ask if we can consider doing a midway gut check to see how we're going to then actually produce something. Because we've learned a lot, the public's learned a lot, but if we're going to actually produce some recommendations, maybe we need to do that gut check. Thank you.
And let me ask staff, to Carla's first question on FTEs, overtime, all the issues involved in that. I think you have a presentation focused on that collection of questions, don't you?
We haven't put the agenda together for April yet, but that could be in the operating budget presentations, yes.
We can vote on that question, or we can just leave it to you to make it happen, because I think collectively we're probably all interested in that topic, all that it embraces. Are you, Commissioner Carla, are you comfortable with?
Yes, as long as the 2 things are addressed and as long as Commissioner Stevens doesn't have a problem with that being incorporated into the discussion.
I actually had a draft item. I was going to put it as an agenda item. I was going to wait till Friday, and it actually added overtime. So I kind of want to think about that again. If that'll wait for 2 days, let me redraft it, and maybe I could send it to Carla only. And
Well,
present it to the commission.
Yeah, as long as you address the issue of staff burnout also. Because there was an article last
It's a
month.
real delicate balance, yeah.
Yeah, about a police officer who is the crisis incident leader, and she had the most overtime of anyone. And my first thought wasn't how much money it was, are we going to burn out a good officer? So I think that has to be incorporated in it, I hope. So I would look forward to seeing it Friday.
Yeah, and if I can tip my hand a little bit on that, I'm talking a lot about the FTEs, which makes you think I'm just trying to crash and burn and cut things. It really is trying to look for things that can be merged and smarter. And I have looked at a lot of the overtime things, and I'm extremely concerned, particularly about police officers and fire people working 50% overtime because their level of performance and the way they can put themselves at risk is like that. So let me think about how to blend all that together.
And to your other question, which was how do we deal with the open items that all of us may want to submit, is there, I guess, to the city attorney, Ms. Scott, is there a problem with them submitting those questions saying, I would like to address the council when we meet with them on this topic or this topic, and send those to me, and I not communicate them broadly to everybody else, just so we have a collection point to to sort of orient our discussion on April 22 with the council.
Chair Smith, thank you. It would be best under the open meeting law if those types of communications simply came to staff. If they were addressed to Sonia and let the staff review those, consider how those are best placed forward on an agenda or put it back on a discussion for a vote of the commission, that would be best. That's what I would recommend.
We can do that. I don't intend to say yes or no or maybe to anybody's request, but we can send them all to staff and they can put it all on a work study agenda and take it from there. Commissioner Stevens, did you have a motion to make?
I move that we call the meeting to a close.
And somebody will second that, I'm sure. So,
Second.
Vice Chair Swiker seconds it.